semi-monthly meeting of the State of Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Council. Today is Tuesday, April 25, 2023. We have one matter down for this evening, and that's the discussion and action on the federal consistency decision, CRMC File 2021-06-029, Revolution Wind LLC, Coastal Zone Management Act Consistency Certification, Offshore Wind Energy Facility in Federal Waters. Would ask that the record reflect those council members that are in attendance, as well as CRMC staff members that are in attendance. First, Matt, one other thing for housekeeping purposes, we have the room until 9 o'clock tonight. So 9 o'clock will be a curfew. Keep that in mind in your presentations. I don't want to chill anyone, but I think that should be enough time for everyone to say what they need to say as it relates to the particular matter before us this evening. First matter on our agenda is subcommittee reports. Mr. Willis, anything?
Yes, Mr. Chair, there's one subcommittee report I want to report on, that is the Rights of Way Subcommittee, which was held prior to this meeting, where we discussed, staff gave a brief status report on the number of rights of ways being considered as potentially public that are under review by the subcommittee. And there's a total of about 8 or 10 right now that the subcommittee has under review, one of which was Spring Ave in Westerly, where we spent some time at the subcommittee discussing how the parties that are in favor and the parties that are against need to come upon an agreed statement of facts and get that to the subcommittee by a date certain in May. At that date certain, we will also attempt to schedule hearings on the matter, to hold public hearings on whether or not the site could be designated as public, hopefully beginning as early as June. That was it for subcommittee reports, Mr. Chair.
Any staff reports?
I'm going to forego the staff report for tonight, Mr. Chair, given the fact that we all met last night and I gave a staff report and the amount of material that we need to cover tonight.
Okay. For lineup purposes, our agenda should go as follows. Mr. Willis will begin, then turn it over to Kevin Sloan, and then Attorney Desatel on the FAB with anyone that you may want. Attorney Main with Revolution, public comments, and then prior to deliberations, I will call upon our counsel just to address the council members as to basically a charge for our deliberation. So that's the way we think we're going to go and that I plan to go. So with that, Mr. Willis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to introduce the concept of federal consistency before I pass it over to staff to go into more detail. And I have some detailed notes, so forgive me if I sound like I'm reading off a piece of paper, but I am. So I just want to say that we're here tonight we're reviewing a matter that's under the consistency provisions of the Federal Coastal Zone Management Act, commonly known as the CZMA. It's a review authority. It's not a regulatory authority, but it is relative to the activities impacts to our policies that are found in the ocean SAMP. How did we get this review authority? Because it's not a regulatory authority. Under the federal CZMA, the provisions allow for a state's coastal zone management program to review activities that occur beyond its state jurisdiction when authorized by NOAA to do so, and when those activities are shown to have an impact on the state's coastal resources. There's a couple of different ways for a state to get this authority from NOAA. One is to petition NOAA, NOAA being the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, my apologies. One is to petition NOAA to review an application that's seeking a federal permit. Another is to ask the applicant who's seeking that federal permit to voluntarily submit to a review, or to develop what is called a geographic location description for the state within which that geographic boundary, certain activities are presumed to have an impact on the state's coastal resources. And if NOAA approves your argument that that's the case, then any activity that's listed within that area can be reviewed by the state coastal program. That's the route Rhode Island took back after we did the ocean SAMP, which was approved by this council in 2010. So in that ocean SAMP process, we gathered a lot of information on what uses were occurring out in federal waters beyond the state jurisdictional boundary. And we used that information to petition NOAA to say within two specific geographic location areas, we feel that we have the information to prove that if certain listed activities are seeking a federal permit, we should be able to review them against our policies. NOAA agreed. And in 2011, we were authorized to look at one specific GLD. In 2018, we did another one. You can see them, council members and anybody online and folks that have downloaded the staff recommendations on page 5 of the staff report. So therefore, CRMC has the right to review these certain activities under those federal consistency provisions that are found in the federal CZMA. We take that review in accordance with those provisions, using the ocean SAMP as our basis for that. We do that with the Fishermen's Advisory Board, which is a policy in the Ocean Special Area Management Plan to advise the agency on how activities might have an impact on the state's coastal resources. Those coastal resources being the fishing industry and the habitat that supports it. So what we have done is working with the FAB and working with the developer. We've spent the better part of a year and a half on finding out what the impacts of this project might have on Rhode Island's coastal resources, how they comport with the policies that we can review them against, and find ways that possibly can mitigate as best as possible that activity's impact underneath Rhode Island's enforceable policies. We feel that the three parties have spent a sufficient amount of time, a lot of time actually, to find mitigation measures that reach those goals. And I'll turn it over to staff to go into some more detail on the travel of that review. But that's generally what a federal consistency review does for coastal programs that are looking in areas beyond their state jurisdiction. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Taking it over to as the Sloan.
Sloan.
Thank you, Director Willis. Just to reiterate what was just said, this is the staff recommendation decision regarding federal consistency review, and it's not an approval of the project. That final approval rests with BOEM, or the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management. I want to start briefly with just an overview of the project itself, where it was when it was first submitted to the agency, and where we've ended up currently. So to start with, the Revolution Wind Farm occupies BOEM lease area OCS-A or A6 on the Outer Continental Shelf. And this lease area is over 83,000 acres. It's a fairly substantial area, and is just north of the South Fork Wind lease area. The scope of the project design envelope, or the PDE, is that the PDE is used to show what a maximum build out could be for a project, while allowing flexibility for a project to be further refined and de-risked as engineering and environmental work progresses. It's important to note that when a construction and operation plan, or a COP, is submitted to BOEM and is also made available to the state agencies, that they use this PDE approach that is refined throughout the review process. So oftentimes these projects do not ultimately look like, they don't look the same as they did when they came in the door. So the PDE in the COP is based on an operating capacity between 704 and 880 megawatts. It contemplates the utilization of wind turbine generators, or WTGs, in the 8 to 12 megawatt range. And it also contemplates up to 100 WTG positions in 2 offshore substations, or OSSs, along with the associated inter-array cables and export cables. So it was a fairly substantial project. The operating capacity is also caveated by purchase power agreements, or PPAs. Revolution Wind has 2 PPAs, technically 3, but PPAs which total 704 megawatts. 400 megawatts would be delivered to Rhode Island. 304 megawatts spread across 2 separate PPAs would be delivered to Connecticut. Again, with a total of 704 megawatts. Project refinements have been fairly significant throughout the process and review of the project. Revolution Wind will be, excuse me, utilizing a Siemens Gamesa 11 megawatt wind turbine generator. Of the original 100 turbine positions in the PDE, 65 will be constructed along with 2 offshore substations for a total of 67 total positions. This will allow Revolution Wind to still meet the PPA obligation of 704 megawatts. Now, the quick math would indicate that, well, 65 positions with an 11 megawatt turbine would produce 715 megawatts, which is 11 megawatts beyond the PPA obligations. This, as was explained to us, this additional position or additional 11 megawatts is necessary to account for what's referred to as line loss, which is essentially inefficiencies in the cable that causes a loss of deliverable power. So the extra power is necessary to ensure the appropriate amount of power is delivered to the point of interconnection. So if there's any discrepancies in the map, that is the reason why. Now, briefly, I'll go through the procedural history of our CZMA review for the Coastal Zone Management Act. So as was stated previously by Director Willis, Revolution Wind is subject to federal consistency review via the CZMA, and more specifically, 15 CFR 930 subpart D, which refers to the consistency for activities requiring a federal license or permit, and subpart E, which refers to consistency for outer continental shelf exploration, development, and production activities. For this overall permitting operation, BOEM is the lead federal permitting agency. This is why many of the decisions that are made after the federal consistency review process are made in conjunction with BOEM and the developer and other federal cooperating agencies. As was referred to earlier as well, our GLDs give us the automatic review authority, the Revolution Wind lease area, and a large portion of the export cable corridor is located within our 2011 GLD as discussed on page 3 through 4 of the staff recommendation. Briefly, the consistency certification, which is more or less the trigger mechanism that is a formal request from the developer or a state coastal agency to begin their review of a project. That was filed by Revolution Wind on June 7, 2021. Within 30 days of receiving that file, we issued our 30-day letter acknowledging receipt of the consistency certification. And we also included additional information that we requested additional information, specifically was referred to as necessary data and information, or NDI. This for CRMC and the Ocean SAMP is typically a meeting with the FAB, the Fishermen's Advisory Board, and the Habitat Advisory Board, or the HAB. Those are listed as NDI in our coastal program. So once those the NDI requirement was met, the CRMC's CZMA 6-month review period began, and that was on August 6, 2021. Shortly thereafter, we entered into 5 stay agreements over the course of the project. And this is a common misconception of, you hear CZMA 6-month review period, you think the review should take 6 months. These stay agreements they are what they sound like. They quite literally stay the review and pause it. So for example, of the 6 months, say you enter your first stay agreement after the first month, your stay agreement is for another 3 months. So you pause your 6-month review, 3-month lapses, and then you pick up again 1 month or 2, and then your clock starts pulling from there. So we have entered into 5 stay agreements over the course of this project for various reasons, whether they be just simply for more time. Oftentimes, state agencies, ourselves included, need the federal the DEIS, the Draft Environmental Impact Statement, which is developed through the NEPA process, NEPA being the National Environmental Policy Act. This extremely substantial document includes a very intense environmental analysis of various impacts, a range of project alternatives, along with a plethora of other information that is vital to a state agency's ability to adequately review a project. We simply don't have the ability to, create that kind of analysis on our own, so we do rely on that. So that's one of the many reasons for these state agreements. Then the next step being in this timeline would be tonight, the council meeting, and then ultimately our decision letter that would be delivered to BOEM with the council's recommendation or decision tonight would be needed before or on May 12th, 2023. So federal consistency review in the context of the overall permitting scheme, I've already touched on this briefly. So state federal consistency review takes place within the larger scheme of a federal permitting scheme. The council's decision tonight and the subsequent decision letter to BOEM is not the final say. BOEM ultimately has that final say. For example, there are additional decisions that are yet to be made. Certain consultations between federal cooperating agencies are either ongoing or soon to start. The final environmental impact statement is yet to be issued, and there will be COP approval and the issuance of the record of decision, or the ROD. So just as an example of, there are many decisions that are yet to be made, final layouts, for example, final engineering, micrositing, things of that nature, we are not privy to yet. And they, for obvious reasons, cannot be incorporated as part of our analysis. All these federal actions will occur after the fact. That being said, like I said, the final layout, micrositing are all things that we really, really would like to be a part of, but we simply do not have the ability to be a part of. The federal consistency review, is not a regulatory action. The CZMA allows for federal review of the project as reasonably foreseeable impacts on state resources. CRMC cannot require a developer to take certain action in federal waters based on state regulatory requirements. For example, in Ocean SAMP section 11.10 section includes a presumptive exclusion which prohibits development in areas of particular concern for APC. Both the presumptive exclusion and APC designation are state regulatory tools that cannot be utilized in federal waters. Rather, the CRMC uses the policy rationale which underlines the presumptive exclusion to review and push for mitigation measures which minimize impacts to areas/uses with the same characteristics, resources, and values as areas designated APC in state waters. Building off of that, as Director Willis stated earlier, the review process was not simply the agency reviewing documents, the COP, the DEIS, et cetera. It also included a multitude of meetings with the developer. We met weekly. We also had ad hoc meetings throughout the week where both parties brought their subject matter experts to discuss a range of topics, including, but not limited to seabed preparation procedures for construction, boulder relocation, benthic conditions and glacial moraine issues, and mitigation, generally speaking. These meetings and conversations were productive, and they led to mutually agreed upon conditions that are included within the staff recommendation. Tonight, we're looking at a concurrence with conditions, which is distinct from the other options a coastal agency has under the CZMA federal consistency provisions. Generally speaking, those options are an outright concurrence. They are a conditional concurrence, an objection, and then a concurrence with conditions. We have chosen to follow the concurrence with conditions route, and this allows us to work with the developer, in this case Revolution Wind, to find common ground, to reach mitigation measures, which we find allows the project to be consistent with our enforceable policies. The staff determined on its face the consistency to certification did not adequately demonstrate consistency and worked with the developer to refine the project and mutually agreed to the 3 conditions contained in the report. Condition 1, Revolution Wind shall include 79 possible positions for the installation of 65 turbine foundations to meet the project's 74 megawatt PPA obligations and the project shall include no more than 2 offshore substations. Condition 2, where practicable, turbine and offshore substation foundations and the associated network of inter-array and export cables will be microsited to minimize regionally foreseeable effects to Rhode Island physical resources and uses, including effects to those resources and uses with the same characteristics, resources, and values as found in Rhode Island state waters. Condition 3, Revolution Wind shall conduct the fisheries research and monitoring plan that receives approval from BOEM as part of the record of decision or COP approval. Based on these mutually agreed to conditions and other mitigating factors which are to be discussed, staff are recommending the council concur with the project and find the project consistent with Rhode Island's enforceable policies located in the ocean sand. I'll quickly walk through the project refinements, modifications, and mitigation measures that have been discussed over the course of our agency's review. As previously mentioned, there's been a significant reduction in the number of turbine positions. The PDE started with 100, then through engineering analysis done by the developer, 21 positions were eliminated from consideration due to bottom conditions such as complex habitat, boulders, etc. They simply prevented, from an engineering standpoint, the ability to safely and effectively install foundations. And then ultimately 65 foundations will be used for turbines, and then 2 foundations will be used for offshore substations. Micrositing, the developer stated they will be able to microsite turbine foundations outside of glacial moraine and complex habitat, pending engineering approval from BOEM. On some of the maps that are available in the DEIS, for example, and also referenced in the staff recommendation, the lines in between the turbine foundations are straight lines. They appear to be laid out in a grid. What I understand and what the developer has explained, it will look more like a web of sorts. It will not necessarily reflect a clean grid pattern. Inter-array cables and export cables will be woven more or less to avoid, to the extent possible, complex glacial moraine habitats, complex bottom, etc. This will, in part help ensure proper cable burial depth, which is very important, and further minimize the need for secondary cable protection. Not to say that secondary protection will not be needed. Boulder relocation. This has been a topic that we have, we as staff worked very hard with the developer to develop. And for reference, it is on page 27 of staff recommendation. The original plan, as we were told, was that simply boulders would be, for the inter-array cables would be picked or moved 90 degrees to the side of the center line of the inter-array cable. This, with input from the fab, let us know that there was real potential for the creation of new hangs or new obstacles for the fishermen would hang up their gear, which poses a significant financial risk, but also a safety risk. Not to mention impacts the habitat, of course. So to try and mitigate that, the developer has agreed to relocate boulders where possible to areas of existing boulders. So instead of putting a boulder where a boulder wasn't before, now it will be in areas of similar body structure, and hopefully this will be able to minimize the number of hangs. Additionally, the gear claims process, this has been a contentious point from day one. It has a reputation of not being overly helpful or pleasant to deal with, and has been described as more of a deterrent than anything. However, the developer has committed to continue to work to further refine and make that process more efficient and user-friendly. The fisheries research monitoring plan and building habitat monitoring plan, a reference to condition 3. The final plan, of course, will be approved by BOEM, is also referenced in Appendix Y of the Revolution Wind COP, which is publicly available on the BOEM project website. The plan has been developed based on BOEM guidelines and seeks to achieve several various goals. which including, developing a baseline of what species are in the lease area, establishing pre-construction information that will inform decision-making, and will also include post-construction abundance and distribution of fisheries. It will allow for the collection of additional information aimed at reducing uncertainty associated with baseline estimates and or to inform the interpretation of research results. And also will help to develop an approach to quantify any substantial changes in the distribution and abundance of fisheries associated with proposed operations. The plan is forward-looking to some degree, and the information provided will be valuable insight into how offshore wind affects fisheries and benthic conditions. This was a very important condition that we really did want to make sure was incorporated because there are a number of uncertainties out there when it comes to offshore wind and offshore wind effects. So to the extent that we can obtain more information that would allow us and others to adequately ocean plan and adjust to a world with offshore wind, we want to achieve that. Additionally, the mariners briefings, I myself am subscribed to them, but they are used by Revolution Wind and other offshore wind developers to provide information as to regarding survey work, vessel locations, timing of activities, construction operation work, etc. It's sent out via email. It's also made available on the developer's website. Social medias, I've seen them on LinkedIn. These are used to help inform to the best extent possible when, where, who, what, when, where, why, more when it comes to offshore wind activities on the Outer Continental Shelf. We've expressed to the developer that as these projects change from a pre-construction to construction to operational to commissioning phase, that these mariners briefings need to adjust accordingly, and they need to be responsive. And they have expressed a willingness and ability to cooperate and make that happen, which is very reassuring. Now, briefly, I'll walk through the enforceable policies before I open up to questions from council. Enforceable policy 11.10.1C. This enforceable policy is essentially a two-part test. Isn't the right word for it, but two-part test. There are two factors to analyze. The first being, is there an overall net benefit to the Rhode Island marine economic sector from the development of a project, or is there an overall net loss? Whether the applicant has modified the proposal to avoid and or mitigate. So, for reference, this begins on page 9 of the staff recommendation. There are going to be certain net benefits as well as negatives to the project. Some of the benefits include financial benefits. A substantial amount of money is projected to be directed specifically to Rhode Island as a result, to the tune, I believe, if I'm referencing the report staff recommendation correctly, annually, anticipated $80 million would be going to the United States as a whole. Of that, 70 million will be directed towards Rhode Island. There's also a substantial amount of money during the construction phase as well, along with associated port developments, upgrades, etc. So there has been and will be the potential for positive impacts from the project. And there are also potential positive impacts from various effects like artificial reef effect. The wind turbine structures themselves will also marine ecosystem. They will attract new species, sea bass, mussels, and other pelagic species, and other species that are attracted to hard structures. This isn't to say that this reef effect and attraction of new species will be a one-to-one replacement for impacts to the presently valuable commercial and recreationally valuable species. But if there will be an increase in some benthic life or fisheries life. As far as negative impacts, some of the biggest ones, of course, are actually, I would take that back. The biggest one most likely is impacts to commercial and recreational fishing in Rhode Island in those sectors. The gentleman's agreement which is referenced on page 19 of the staff agreement or the staff recommendation, has been successful in minimizing conflict in the way fishers operate in the area, which is now going to be the Revolution Wind Farm. There are going to be navigational issues. How does one navigate within a wind array? And not just navigate, but how does one fish? How does one fish safely, effectively, and economically? There's going to be a transition period. You know, the introduction of structure will disrupt historic fishing practices. So there will be a transition period of now how do fishers operate, learn to operate, and transition? What that time frame looks like is unknown. Access issues will also be created, whether that be access to the ability to fish or access in the sense of, you know, someone does not necessarily feel safe, like they can actually enter into a wind farm and fish and or just navigate through effectively. So some fishers may be pushed out, so to speak, of the wind farm itself. And also modifications by the fishing fleet via their operations as discussed, and also their gear. The certain gear types will have to be modified to be able to fish with, between turbines. And that costs money and it takes resources, and with current supply chain issues, that can be a real task. But also figuring out how to not just adopt the gear, but then adopt your fishing operations with adopted gear into a wind array. As mentioned briefly before, ecosystem effects, there's the artificial reef effect, and also the change from soft to hard bottom habitat. The introduction of hard bottom scour protection, the turbine columns themselves will alter areas that are predominantly soft bottom and attract new species, alter the marine environment, which is, again, unknown for the most part. But we do believe that the modifications mitigation by the developer, as discussed before, has been and is adequate to find that the project is consistent with our enforceable policies. Again, the reduction in the number of turbine positions, micrositing foundations. So foundations are able to be microsited within a more or less a 500-foot area of where they are planned to be put, and micrositing of cables around Glacier Marine and boulder fields. Again, these final micrositing determinations are made after the federal consistency review process by CRMC and are ultimately made by BOEM. For enforceable policy 11.10.1G, which is on page 30 of the staff report, the staff recommendation. This enforceable policy discusses mitigation in general. As stated, again, the staff recommendation, there are certain uncertainties that do exist with the long-term effects of offshore wind. With regard to the reasonably foreseeable impacts, which is the standard of review for federal consistency, staff are of the opinion that mitigation measures and project modifications that have been stated by and committed to by the developer in the mutually agreed to conditions allow the project to meet our enforceable policies. Compensatory mitigation for the fishing community has also been offered, but has not been agreed to. Enforceable policy 11.10.1H, page 34 of the staff recommendation, also discusses and recognizes the importance of glacier marine edges in the Rhode Island fishing industry, and that those impacts and resources should be mitigated. Conditions 1 and 2 that are mutually agreed to allow the project to be consistent with this enforceable policy. Again, the micrositing of turbine foundation and array cables, as well as mitigation efforts such as the border relocation plan. Enforceable policy 11.10.1I, page 36 of the staff recommendation, refers to protecting sensitive habitat areas that valuable species at all life stages. Once again, conditions 1 and 2 do allow for the project to be consistent with this enforceable policy. And 11.10.2B, which is page 42. This includes the presumptive exclusion. The staff report does go, or staff recommendation does go into detail as to why that presumptive is not necessarily applicable and how the underlying policy of the forest policy is being used to seek additional mitigations. And with that, I open it up to question from the council.
Any questions
I
from
have-
council members?
I have just one.
Sure. Go ahead.
I was looking through this and I don't know as you mentioned it, and maybe it's a second order effect, but this wind wake effect. And you indicated in here that, might have impact on search and rescue and the operations and things like that. Just maybe comment on that a minute or two.
Yeah, absolutely. So just for quick reference, we're referring to wind wake, which is the effect of having all of the turbines turning and how that impacts the water body essentially and the area, not just within the wind farm, but also downwind, so to speak, of the wind farm. This has impacts with things like nutrient circulation in the water body, because it does change the way, for lack of a better term, that the current flows. I'm by no means a scientist or expert in this area, but it does have impacts or potential impacts. This is something that is being studied more and more in Europe, and the understanding of it is growing, but is still relatively new and in its infancy these days. So there is the potential for impacts from wind wake, but as to what those exact impacts are, we cannot be 100% certain at this time.
So it'll be just something we're looking out for and trying to get data from probably.
Correct. There's
Good thing.
yes, there's an element of adaptation for all of the.
Thank you.
Any other questions of Mr. Sloan at this time? All right. Anything else, Kevin? All right. At this point, then we will turn it over to Attorney Desatel, representing the FAB.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, council members. I'm Attorney Marissa Desatel of Desatel Law, and I represent the Fishermen's Advisory Board of Rhode Island. I will be referring to that group as the FAB. And to my left is co-counsel Attorney Karen Browning, also of Desatel Law. As hopefully everyone is aware, the FAB is meant to be advisory to CRMC. It is a creature of regulations. The ocean stamp relies heavily on the expertise of the FAB members, and that expertise is meant to inform the council as a resource, which is what we intend to do tonight. With that said, before I get into the substance of our presentation, there is an issue that needs to be addressed. Last week on Thursday and Friday, there was an incident that occurred in Ørsted's South Fork project area. The incident was caused by an Ørsted vessel called the Fleet King. I am sure, again, that council and staff are aware of something called a 500-yard exclusion zone that applies to cable laying operations. In essence, Ørsted and the CRMC agreed that no fishing activity can occur within 500 yards on both sides of a cable being installed. This is the parameter and information upon which the Rhode Island fishing community engaged in for mitigation and for future planning. However, last Thursday and Friday, the Ørsted vessel, the Fleet King, radioed to other vessels that all mariners adhere to a 1.5 mile exclusion zone on both sides of a cable that they were dropping in the South Fork area and then letting it float. Based on this communication, fishers were excluded from a 3-mile fishing area. This is not what was agreed to, and this change has devastating effects, not only on daily fishing vessels, but also on the credibility of the developer and the FAB and CRMC's ability to reasonably rely on what the developer tells us. The FAB is asking that the council take action, as this is a violation of the federal consistency determination and invalidates the mitigation process for Orsted's wind farm projects, including this one. The FAB and CRMC staff cannot provide meaningful advice on the harms from the project we are here for tonight, called Revolution Wind, without knowing more about what actually occurred last Thursday and Friday. Additional information is needed. We are requesting a continuance of this hearing to allow for that additional investigation, to gather information and decide how we even move forward. This incident and the ability to enforce the terms of prior agreements applies to all wind farms, and it has a direct effect on mitigation. If a 1.5 mile exclusion zone is needed rather than a 500-yard zone, additional mitigation is also needed. The FAB's concern is that as projects are constructed and operated and the FAB members continue to fish, they will be excluded or otherwise prevented from fishing based on incorrect information. These incidents are likely to repeat. There was no recourse for vessels fishing last week. Currently, there is no clear path of recourse should something like this happen again. And if something is not done now, the FAB fears that as these projects move forward, there will be no way to stop a developer from usurping the terms of its approval. Also, as I said, this is a credibility issue for the developer. If Ørsted needs 1.5 miles, then they need to revise their project documents and come back to the CRMC with the correct information. As I said, we are asking for more time to gather more information. This just occurred Thursday and Friday of last week. That's what we're asking.
You want to just address that, Jeff?
My understanding of and I am aware of the incident. I was apprised of the incident last Thursday and contacted the developer who claimed it was not their vessels that were making these communications. That said, my understanding of the 500-yard on either side of a cable is not a CRMC requirement. It's a BOEM requirement that goes in their approval of the COP. So the federal government would be the enforcement arm for that type of transgression, if you will. And Bessie, which is the Bureau's Safety and Engineering section, is the enforcement arm of BOEM that would handle that particular matter. It would not be with the CRMC.
May I reply?
Sure.
I understand. We took a look at the Bessie option. It is not an option. There is no recourse within that agency. Our concern is not only that there was an incident last week, but we were involved with the conversation with Ørsted asking if it was their vessel. They said no. In fact, they said it wasn't us, it was Vineyard Wind. And now today, it's my understanding that Ørsted is taking responsibility for this. So our concern is credibility. Who are the FAB to believe? They're the ones out there fishing impacted by incidents like this. This is also not the only example of credibility with Ørsted. They were supposed to conduct a gillnet survey. We brought that to the CRMC staff's attention, and it's our understanding that there's no recourse there either. Lastly, this is not what we would consider to be a one-time error. These mariners notices go out often. So for there to be such a break in the chain of communication internally between what Ørsted's approvals are from this council and what they're telling their contractors needs to be addressed. Again, it just happened on Thursday and Friday. We are asking for more time to figure out if this is a systemic issue, and if it is, how do we address it through the mitigation process? We're advisory to you, but we are asking for an opportunity to go back and figure out what really happened and how to address it appropriately. We're talking about fishermen's safety. These are Rhode Islanders that are unable to make a living as a result of activities like this. We have two witnesses available tonight, Christopher Brown and Robert Jonathan Doherty, who will provide further information to you about what actually transpired. I think you need to hear it. I think Rhode Island needs to hear it. And we would ask again for more time to go back and take a look at what happened and how to deal with it.
Now, I'm going to make a suggestion. Before we get to Mr. Brown, who's actually one of the witnesses for tonight, or Mr. Doherty, could we hear from Worsted? You said that they've acknowledged that this happened. I think it's important to get that on the record if that's the case. Could we hear from legal counsel briefly, because this is a discrete issue?
It is a discrete issue and we can address it quickly and there's no need for a continuance. Some of the comments that you just heard from Attorney Desautels are incorrect, and Kellen Ingalls, who is here, will come up in a moment and address those. This was an issue with South Fork. It has nothing to do with Revolution Wind. This Revolution Wind proceeding must go forward tonight. And I would like Kellen to come up now and address what happened with the Fleet King, which is a fishing boat. It is not an Orsted vessel, but it is a fishing boat working on behalf of South Fork. So Kellen, I'd like you to introduce yourself to the council and what your position is with Revolution Wind.
Yeah, I'm going to sway in a minute, but I just want to make it clear that you're not acknowledging that this incident happened.
No, Attorney DeSisto, there was an incident with the Fleet King. The Fleet King issued some notifications over channel 16 on the marine radio, essentially, that had some incorrect information in it as far as spacing. But there was no cable being laid. Portion of the cable's already been laid, and in fact, our cable vessel for South Fork, again, I want to emphasize this is South Fork, is in South Carolina. So this was a fishing vessel that was guarding certain portions of the cable that was already on the seabed floor, requesting, and I emphasize the word requesting, that fishing and other activities not go on in a certain area, but it was only a request. And in fact, fishing for weeks now has been going on within or less than that 1.5 mile area. There is no way that Orsted or frankly, any other offshore developer can institute their own exclusion zones. That's a Coast Guard issue, and the Coast Guard has not done that here. So there was a mistake with the radio announcement that went out by the vessel. It was immediately corrected, done, end of story. It has been completed. And Kellen, you can speak, just very briefly, a little bit more if the council would like.
Is that necessary for the board members? Do you want to hear from this guy?
Yes,
Yeah.
I'm happy taking council's representations, or make a proffer or just say what happened. I don't think we need testimony from Orsted on this.
All right, go to Joe Cole.
It seems that the consensus is that they're satisfied with your representation at this point.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
It's a credibility issue, and I think that's what Ms. Desautels is saying, so.
We recognize that, and we want, let me just say this one last thing. We want, when issues come up, to know about them so we can correct them. And the South Fork team did correct that.
Okay, thank you. We get a vote on her request for a continuance.
Before you do, ask if they would agree to, because we're almost at the deadline now. I think you have to know if that would be an agreement. If not, you're really looking at a decision tonight or shortly after tonight.
Right, well, I think that they're using them.
Correct.
Revolution has indicated that we don't need a continuance, so I don't think they're agreeing. You're not agreeing to a continuance, correct?
Absolutely not, Mr. Chair. There's no need for it. We're ready to go tonight and conclude this evening.
As you heard from staff, deadline is coming up. That's the issue that we have.
Okay. Do I need
Do you
a
guys
vote
take
for it?
public comments at this point or not at all?
No, no.
Public comment will be later.
Do I need a vote on that?
Well, it's a request for a continuance, yes.
All right. So,
Excuse me, Chair.
yes,
To interrupt. Prior to the vote, as I indicated, we have two witnesses that we would like to offer. We also have written affidavits from them that we'd like to have you consider before you take that vote. I think you need to hear from the fishermen on this issue.
You know, here's the thing, I'm okay because this is bad presentation time,
Right.
so.
They're
We
here
just-
tonight. The two fishermen are here. They're taking another day to
Okay, we'll-
address this issue.
We'll incorporate that. This is your presentation time, so we'll incorporate it into that.
Okay, great.
As a point of clarification, excuse me, Attorney Desautels, are we going to have certain presentation time limits here tonight? Including for public comment?
No,
Just wanted to know if we were going forward with that. Thank you.
okay,
We would like to have Robert Jonathan Doherty. Want to take a seat right here? Swear you in.
sir,
Attorney Browning is going to hand out copies of a document and then you want to swear him in, we're ready to go.
sir, please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Robert Jonathan Doherty. D-O-U-G-H-T-Y.
Is this going to be narrative or question and answer?
7 questions and answers.
Robert, okay.
Karen.
I got it.
Just let me know when we can start with the.
We can begin.
please. Okay. Good evening, Mr. Doherty. I know you just gave your name and spelled it for the record, but could you just start with that again, please?
My name is Robert Doherty.
And what do you do for work, Mr. Doherty?
I'm a commercial fisherman. I run a boat for my uncle for the last 40 years.
Have you been fishing for the last 40 years off the coast of Rhode Island?
Yes.
Can you walk us through what happened to you on April 20th, 2023 while you were fishing?
I was towing to the west and trying to find some fluke, and I passed another vessel and I started turning south because I was informed there might be some fluke down that way, and all of a sudden I got a call on the radio. And he said his name real quick, and he said that there's a cable up ahead, and at this position, you have to stay 1.5 miles from it. And I was kind of surprised because there was nobody within 2 miles of me at the time. And I see a boat 3 miles away, and he said, you need to turn now to avoid this area. And I did so, you know, I didn't want to get messed up into the gear and stuff. And I asked him who he worked for, and at first he said he was a private contractor. And he said Orsted, and you know, I had to ask him for the ordinance, you know, several times so I could write it down because he was just saying it so fast. And I said, well, how am I supposed to make a living? And he just chuckled, and that was that.
And how did this interaction on April 20th interfere with your ability to fish that day?
Well, I wasn't able to get to where I wanted to go, and just pull back right after I set in, steam, you know, close to 3 miles, just takes up a lot of time. And it just, you know, it was frustrating, mostly to say, because he gave me numbers on a spot that there was nobody there. I was the only one there.
And again, whose cable was it that was being installed according to this?
He said he was a private contractor. When I asked him, who do you work for? I'm a private contractor. And he said, Orsted.
Okay, And do you know if the Fleet King gave the same instructions to other vessels on the 20th?
I heard them giving instructions where other guys were passing through earlier that day, saying that they needed to avoid this area. I assume it was a lobster boat, but I'm not positive because, you know, a lot of days you hear them all the time talking, and some days you don't hear them at all. And they were having quite an argument. And actually, I could only hear mostly half the conversation once they switched from channel 13 to channel 11, I believe. It was only, you know, I could only hear the fishing boat talking, not Orsted, because the radio wasn't putting out well.
I have no other questions for this witness, but if the council has questions, please ask.
Any questions of the council? Does Robert have a right to cross-examine?
I have no questions. This is a consistency proceeding. It's a meeting. And to be taking testimony during the consistency meeting is inappropriate procedurally.
Understood. So noted.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. I would like to have Chris Brown as our next witness on this issue, please.
That we should be taking.
It's that. So,
Because it's advisory to us.
yes. Now, Mr. Brown is here in his capacity as a member of the FAB, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
Thank you.
Please raise your right hand. Swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Christopher Tanner Brown, CHRISTOPHER, TANNER, BROWN.
Mr. Brown, what do you do for a living?
I'm a commercial fisherman for the past 46 years.
And have you provided or executed an affidavit for your testimony tonight?
Yes, I have.
I'd like to have you provide a narrative for the events that you attest to in your affidavit, please.
Well, on the first day of the two that were mentioned, let me see, I was fishing abreast of Block Island, and I could hear partial conversations. The next day I moved farther out and I heard Mr. Doherty. Mr. Doherty was contacted by a vessel employed by Orsted. And when you employ a vessel, it's defined by what it's doing. It's not a fishing vessel. It's a vessel employed by Orsted. It is an agent of your organization. He told Mr. Doherty he couldn't continue in his current course and that he would have to stay 1.5 miles away. And then he told him in a very bullying fashion that he had talked to him about this before, which was not the case. He had never spoken to John Doherty in the Winter Marine. John abandoned hope that day for pursuing prosperity because these boats only go 7 miles an hour. So by the time you turn around and head back to where you just came from, where you didn't catch anything, your day is pretty much shot. A number of us did not go that way that day. A number of vessels abandoned hope on the first day that they were warned. It's in Block Channel. It is a natural passageway for fish to travel from the offshore waters to Block Island Sound. And the cable is right in the middle of it. We fish the channel quite a lot. So to lose 3 miles of that area at the peak of an epic migration is pretty bad. So I talked to John about it. And I explained to him that it was only supposed to meet 500 yards. That's all they had negotiated for. I went on and I called the Coast Guard. The Coast Guard said that they had not issued anything from the Port of Providence. Captain of the Port of Providence or the local ports. So the usurpation of authority was in full display. We don't know what to believe. We don't know what we're dealing with. You know, you can't claim that someone is acting on their own simply because they're in your employ. You are the captain of a ship. You're responsible for everything good or bad on the water. When you hire someone to do your work for you, you own it. You can't walk away from it by redefining the nature of the vessel's origins. So, Mr. Doherty gave a very accurate account of what went on. I will also add that the following day, I went out there and I was hell bent to bump into this fella. I called him and he wouldn't answer. I announced on the radio for all fishermen within earshot, which is about 30 miles, that they do not have the authority to claim 1.5 miles, effectively 3 miles. It was BS. And everyone was fairly relieved. So to suggest it was an unimpactful event isn't accurate. To say that it didn't erode any confidence that we have going forward is inaccurate. And there is only one reality of the situation. You can't make stuff up as you go along. And to that, we have almost no confidence going forward until we have a little cooling off period, a time to sit down, work out some more details about communications, about names, about boats, about who's where, who, you know, we bump into a boat, someone tells us to go home, we gotta go home. We have to do a little better than that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Any questions of Mr. Brown from the council? Attorney Main, any questions?
Thank you.
Thank you for allowing us to put on those witnesses and we're ready to resume presentation pending our request for more time. This is a significant safety issue. It was not a one-time thing. It was 2 days and it took the involvement of Chris Brown, a member of the FAB, to get on the radio and clear up the issue. And it should not be on Rhode Islanders to police the appropriate behavior of an offshore wind developer. So again, we'd ask for more time. Thank you.
Thank you. Right to the council, a request has been made by Attorney Desitel on behalf of the FAB seeking a continuance. What's the council's pleasure? Mr. Gomez.
I think Robin addressed it appropriately, and I understand this problem, but I don't think it ought to impact our meeting tonight to the Revolutionary Wind. I'd like to hear other opinions from the council members.
Well, is your motion to deny the request for continuance?
If there is, well, we will have discussion. If I move to deny the request, we have time for discussion.
All right.
Yes.
So you make,
I will move that.
is there a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion?
I would intend to agree with Mr. Gomez, given the deadline that we have to make a decision. I understand it's a serious situation, but I think hopefully this issue can be addressed and we can move forward with the hearing tonight.
I'm inclined to agree. Not doubting either of the gentlemen. However, both testimonies or answers are riddled with hearsay on top of hearsay. And I'm not saying that to doubt them, but there's so much more. Each individual said that they heard partial conversation, not the whole thing. So I'm not doubting what they said here tonight. But I also don't think that that's pertinent to the matter that's before us in a consistency hearing for Revolution Wind. So I would support denying the request for continuance. Ms. Hall?
I think that the issue is real relative to the fact that we're hearing from both sides that there's some element of confusion, communication issues, and I think that's part and parcel of how we're moving forward in this area. Particularly relevant to this hearing today on the consistency review process. These issues of communication that have been brought up by the FAB have been identified in the staff report, have been responded to by the applicant, are part of the conversation that can continue. And I think these are data points that are probably relevant to that discussion that we're going to hear tonight relative to the consistency the consistency review. So I don't think I agree with my colleagues that I would not agree to a continuance, but I would also say, I think it's useful to continue to be informed and have this as a point of information that I think is, worthy of sharing, but in the context of what we have in front of us, which is this consistency review.
I'd just like to put on the record, if I may, that have relatives that are commercial fishermen. I held a license myself when I was in college, and I favor, I try very hard to support the fishermen and the oyster farmers and things like that. But I can concur with Ms. Hall that it should be a separate subject. I think we addressed it. We have the affidavits. It's something that's new to me, but I don't think it should impact the revolutionary wind farm discussion that we're trying to get through tonight. So just for the record.
Thank you. Any other further discussion? Having none, motion made and seconded to deny the request for a continuance. I'll poll the council. Ms. Daisy,
Aye.
Ms. Hall,
Aye.
Mr. Gagnon.
Aye.
Ms. McGovern, Mr. Gomez. I too, Raymond Coyer, vote aye. So the motion to deny the continuance is approved unanimously. Please continue your presentation.
And thank you for your consideration on that topic. Moving to the presentation in chief with respect to the work that the FAB, its expert consultant in my office did. I have a 3.5 minute opening statement. I'd then like to proceed to 3 witnesses. One will be Rich Hittinger, one will be Rick Belvance, and the third will be Chris Brown, followed by a presentation by the FAB's expert economist, Todd Gilfus. So with that, as the background, if that sounds okay, I'll jump right in. Thank you. After review of all documents, countless meetings with the developer, and based on the FAB's expert, we believe that the council does not have enough information to make a decision tonight. This is because Ørsted has failed to acknowledge the impacts to fisheries and therefore has failed to properly mitigate its impacts. Because of this, Ørsted cannot demonstrate consistency with the Ocean SAMP's enforceable policies. The applicant and its federal consistency submission indicates that the project will have little to no impacts. According to the applicant's construction and operations plan, however, impacts of up to 3 years are expected. Since the project is expected to have at least 3 years worth of impacts, the FAB has identified other mitigation measures that would help protect these areas and the fisheries located there. The other mitigation measures that I just referenced were submitted in the FAB's supplemental memorandum, which we filed yesterday. Hopefully you have a copy of that supplemental memorandum. If not, we have extra copies with us tonight. Due to the lack of information provided by Ørsted, and now with last week's incident, many impacts to the fishing industry have not been properly mitigated. There are too many uncertainties. A significant disruption to existing coastal uses is expected, especially to fisheries. Even BOEM has indicated that there will be major adverse impacts to commercial fisheries, and there will have to be substantial modifications to fishing gear and operations. Ørsted's economic expert, Hui, has provided estimates on the fisher's exposure, but Hui are not appropriate experts on these topics. Hui is paid by the developer. The FAB's expert, on the other hand, will provide appropriate information on the fisher's actual exposure tonight. It is the FAB's position that the conditions mentioned in the staff decision do not go far enough to mitigate the impacts of this project. Cox's Ledge and Glacial Moraine are of particular concern because these areas provide essential habitat for many marine species. Regardless of the use of noise mitigating efforts, mortality to eggs and larvae, as well as to those fish and benthic species that do not or cannot leave the area, will occur around each foundation. Additional impacts to the benthic species will occur due to the boulder moving activities in and around foundations and cable routes. There are also substantial uncertainties regarding the cumulative effects of having multiple offshore wind projects abutting one another that need to be considered. The ocean is dynamic, and the cumulative impacts of other leases such as South Fork Wind, Vineyard Wind, Sunrise Wind, and Revolution Wind need to be considered. To date, however, cumulative impacts have not been discussed or mitigated. Not only are glacial moraines affected, but the project location on Cox's Ledge means that a substantial portion of the proposed development overlaps with hard bottom complex habitat that is labeled essential fish habitat for a number of species. Cox's Ledge is spawning area for Atlantic cod. Since the applicant refuses to acknowledge or otherwise properly mitigate these impacts, the FAB respectfully requests additional conditions be made part of the council's decision in order to provide some mitigation to fisheries. The FAB believes that the council does not have enough information to make a final decision tonight. I say that again. Orsted has not provided enough information, and additional mitigation is necessary to address project impacts. The FAB asks for your consideration on these issues and for more time to properly address them. In the alternative, and as the project documents do not properly address or acknowledge the negative impacts of this project, it is the FAB's position that the developer has failed to demonstrate consistency with CRMC's enforceable policies. And I would like to call our first witness unless there's any follow-up questions to anything I just said.
Any questions from council members at this point? Please proceed.
Thank you. We'd like to start with Rich Whittinger, please.
Mr. Hitcher, please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, so help you God. Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Sure, it's Richard Hittinger, R-I-C-H-A-R-D, Hittinger.
Thank you.
Good evening. Could you tell us what you do for work, please?
Well, I'm retired now, but I am a recreational fisherman
How long have you been a recreational fisherman?
for over 40 years in Rhode Island.
Are you involved with any fishing associations?
Yes, I am first vice president of the Rhode Island Saltwater Anglers Association.
And is that the shirt that you've got on right now?
That's the
Okay.
shirt that I have on.
Great.
Yes.
Are you familiar with the Revolution Wind project?
Yes, I am. And of course, I'm a member of the Fisheries Advisory Board as well.
Thank you. How are you familiar with the Revolution Wind project?
Well, I've reviewed many of their documents, although I must say that reviewing 6,000 pages of technical information on a project is quite formidable, even though my career was in environmental engineering and environmental science. It's still quite formidable.
Now, I see that you have an affidavit in front of you.
Yes, I do.
Is that an affidavit that you executed for tonight's testimony?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So based on your experience, what level of recreational fishing activity occurs within the Revolution Wind project area?
The Revolution Wind project area is located largely on an area called Cox Ledge. And that is the most important offshore recreational fishing area for all of Rhode Island and southeastern Massachusetts.
What specific recreational fisheries species do you expect to be impacted by construction of this project?
Well, there are quite a number of species, largely black sea bass, cod, tuna and shark, which are two of the pelagic species that are very popular in that area. Bluefish, scup, bonito, false albacore, and even summer flounder.
How, if you know, how will construction impact those species that you just listed?
Well, it's impossible to say exactly what will happen during construction and after construction. However, the information that the developer provided in their draft environmental impact statement showed significant impact during installation, because during installation, they will be driving monopiles, which are about 36 feet in diameter. They'll be pounding these into the seafloor. And during that process, the applicant's own documents indicate that there will be over 217 decibels of sound energy propagated into the surrounding area. And they, in their own documents, indicate that that will affect the finfish and invertebrates, as well as larvae, out to over 2 miles in all directions.
Based on your experience, how will delays to the construction schedule impact recreational fishing in this area?
Well, this area is used by recreational fishermen really from the springtime, well, virtually all year. I was going to say springtime all the way through the late fall, but it's even a winter area for fishing because of the species that are located there. In the winter, it's primarily cod fishing, but if this delays into the spring, there would be additional impacts on both black sea bass and codfish. And if it lasts into the summer, if installation lasts into the summer, then all of the species that I mentioned earlier would be affected, including the pelagic species.
And based on your experience, how will secondary coverage of cables impact recreational fishing?
Well, secondary coverage basically means that the cable cannot be buried to the target depth. And so therefore, the developer is required to put a concrete mattress on top of the cable. So a concrete mattress is basically a device that is concrete blocks, large concrete blocks that are fastened together with, I'll call it wire, that fastens them together, and it's made into a large mat. This is placed on top of the cable, which cannot be adequately buried. And then this becomes an area where, just like the commercial fishermen lose nets, we lose fishing gear too, because we're bottom fishing this area quite a bit, and you start snagging all your gear. You've got a boat full of people, and all of a sudden everybody says, "I've got a fish," but they don't. They've got bottom, and everything breaks off all at once.
Based on your experience, how will moving boulders impact recreational fishing in this area?
Well, boulders are habitat, and habitat is why this is such a good fishing area. When you start picking up boulders, you're changing the habitat. You move them somewhere else, and you're disturbing the habitat where you put them. So not only are you disturbing the habitat where you pick them up, you're also disturbing the habitat where you place them. Now, maybe where you place them will eventually become better habitat, but that can take many, many years for that small ecosystem to develop in that new area.
Okay. What other impacts to recreational fishing do you expect to occur as a result of this project?
Well, I mean, in addition to the fact that people will go there and potentially not find the species of fish that they expected to find, they're also going to go there and see these monstrous industrial structures. A lot of people go recreational fishing for a whole host of reasons. One is to catch fish to bring home to eat. Another is to get out there and relax. And a lot of people that I speak to say, look, we go to Cox Ledge all the time, and it is such a pristine environment. It is so relaxing. That's why we go there. We go there to catch fish too, but relaxation is all part of it. And they're saying to me, how can you possibly have these monstrous structures that are the size of the turbines that are southeast of Block Island out on Cox Ledge? You can't do that to the area. You'll wreck the whole environment, in terms of relaxation.
Have you had an opportunity to review the CRMC staff's recommended decision for this case?
I actually did, yes.
And do you have an opinion on the mitigation package as proposed?
Well, yes.
What's that opinion, please?
My opinion is that the fact that recreational fishing was not included in mitigation is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, if I look at one area where recreational fishing is critical for offshore in Rhode Island, it's Cox Ledge. And between South Fork and Revolution, they're going to basically affect the entire Cox Ledge.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for this witness?
Any questions from the council of Mr. Hittinger? Oh, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Our next witness is Rick Bellavance. It's my understanding that he's going to be able to provide testimony via some kind of virtual option. He is at a fishing conference in Florida. Where is he?
Can you hear me okay?
We can't.
I can hear you guys. Yep.
Yes, Rick, go ahead. We can hear you.
Mr. Bellavance, can I swear you in?
Yep, go right ahead.
Please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
My name is Richard Bellavance, RICHARD BELLAVANCE.
Mr. Bellavance, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Could you start with just confirming that you are a member of the Fishermen's Advisory Board?
Yes, I'm a member of the Fishermen's Advisory Board representing the charter and party sector.
And what do you do for work?
I'm the owner and operator of Priority Fishing Charters in Point Judith, Rhode Island, and I represent Rhode Island on the New England Fishery Management Council.
Are you involved with any fishing associations?
I am. I'm the president of the Rhode Island Party and Charter Boat Association.
And what is the purpose of that association?
The Rhode Island Party and Charter Boat Association is a cooperative of 60 small business owners that run party and charter fishing businesses. Our purpose is to market charter fishing and draw people to Rhode Island to fish on our boats, and also to advocate for safety issues, fishery management, and so on like that.
Mr. Bellavance, did you execute an affidavit in support of your testimony tonight?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. And are you familiar with the Revolution Wind project?
I am.
How are you familiar with it?
As a member of the Fishermen's Advisory Board, I've reviewed all of the documentation relative to the project and taken part in a bunch of meetings and negotiations, so on.
How many charter boats would you estimate fish in the Revolution Wind project area?
I would say 40 to 50 charter boats that I can think of off the top of my head that fish there throughout the course of the year.
Approximately how many charter vessel trips in federal waters were made in 2020, if you know?
I think it was around 11,000. I have a document I can pull up to get the exact number, but it's in my affidavit.
I was going to say, it looks like you have a document appended to your affidavit. Is that the material that you're referencing now?
Yes, National Marine Fisheries Service, or NOAA Fisheries, they publish recreational catch and effort data on a website. And the program that they run is called the Marine Recreational Information Program. That's where that information came from.
And looking at this NOAA Fisheries Service document that's appended to your affidavit, it looks like there are estimates for trips per calendar year. Did I get that right?
Yes, the way that the Marine Recreational Information Program works, they consider each individual that takes a trip, a fishing trip. So if you have 4 or 5 passengers on a charter boat, each one of those passengers would equal 1 trip.
And so how many trips, if you know, how many charter vessel trips in federal waters were made in 2020?
If you give me a second. In 2020, there were 10,736.
How about 2021?
13,289.
2022?
11,829.
And of those trips that you just mentioned for the 2020, 2021, and 2022 calendar years, how many do you estimate occur in and around the area proposed for the Revolution Wind development?
So the Marine Recreational Information Program doesn't pull that data out to specific areas like that, but I can say from my experience, thousands of those charters end up on Cox Ledge because, as Rich Hittinger mentioned, this is one of the premier offshore fishing grounds for recreational fishermen.
Based on
And,
your,
sorry.
okay. Mr. Bellavance, were you done speaking?
Yep. Yes.
Okay, sorry about that.
Sorry.
Based on your experience, what fisheries species do you expect to be impacted by construction of this project?
So in the Revolution Wind area, we fish for cod, scup, Atlantic bonito, false albacore, black sea bass, tautog, tuna fish, sharks, hakes, weakfish, bluefish, and summer flounder. And all of those are likely to be impacted by the construction and operation of this project.
How, if you know, how will delays to construction impact party and charter fishing in this area?
So it depends on the length of a delay, right? Like a few months past their construction schedule into the spring of 2025 would impact our cod fishery and our tautog fishery. If that delay gets extended a little longer, then you start to really affect the migration of Atlantic bluefin tuna and other big game fish. And if construction gets delayed longer, than all of the different species that I referenced just a minute ago could all be impacted by continued construction.
Based on your experience, how will secondary coverage of cables impact charter fishing in this area?
Sure. I think like Mr. Hittinger mentioned, the main concern we have is with snagging the bottom. So some of the equipment that we use, the gear we use for charter fishing are metal jigs, and they're not cheap, right? Folks are drifting along and they hang on those concrete mats, then the likelihood of breaking off and losing those jigs are a probability. And there's also the combination of losing fishing time to have to re-rig all of everybody's gear, and their experience gets a little bit impacted by that. So it's mostly hanging on the bottom.
Based on your experience, how will moving boulders impact charter fishing in this area?
So I've been fishing in this area for a long time, and I have all these spots all figured out, right? I've gone there, found out where the different boulders and rock piles are, and they're all in my navigation equipment. And I have a game plan for every trip laid out. I'm going to fish this rock pile, that rock pile, so on. Well, if they start to move them all around, it's going to take me some time to figure out where they went to, for starters. And I'm not sure they're even going to hold the fish the same way the rock piles do now, right? It's just unknown that has me concerned. It's definitely going to take me a while to reconfigure my logbooks and my plotters to understand where the best fishing areas are now, that in light of the new environment that's out there.
What other effects, if any, of the project do you expect to impact charter fishing?
So one impact that I think is going to personally affect me and business like mine is when we're big game fishing. We call it HMS, highly migratory species. Those are your tuna fish and your sharks. Well, those are big animals. And when you hook one of them, it's not unexpected to have them take a lot of line and start running all over. And it takes several hours to get them in sometimes. I see these obstructions in the water as hindering my ability to get those fish back to the boat. And most likely I'm going to avoid the area, right? We've heard reports that these structures could actually kind of gather forage fish around and so on. Well, if the big game fish are swimming around these things, then it's going to be a lot more difficult to catch them. And the likelihood of breaking off is going to be a disappointment to my customers and frustrating to me and impact my business.
Thank you, Mr. Bellavance. Those are all the questions that I have.
Any questions of the council of Mr. Bellavance?
I just have one.
Mr. Gomez?
Gone through your affidavit, well written, and I understand your concerns. We have 5 wind turbines out, as you're aware, off Block Island wind farm. Have you experienced any of these problems? And I know it's a much smaller scale, but have you experienced any of these problems with that wind farm, which was kind of put in as an experiment to see if there was any future in the wind turbines for us?
So thank you for the question, Mr. Gomez. I have tried to fish around the wind farm around Block Island on occasion, and it's a little sketchy depending on the weather. I've been able to catch some fish like black sea bass and summer flounder, but I haven't been able to catch cod like we used to before that farm was there. And regarding the big game fish, that's not really an area that we go for those. So I haven't tried to fish there for big game fish. I normally go more towards Cox Ledge and other areas offshore for that type of fishing. And I anticipate that being a problem. I haven't encountered it in Block Island because I honestly don't fish for big game fish there. But the inshore stocks that I fish on, it's mixed success, right? The area gets popular. A lot of boats go there. The bigger fish get picked off, and now you're just left with a bunch of little ones, and you end up throwing them back off. So I find myself fishing there less and less all the time as time goes on.
In your opinion, has the cod fishery, sport cod fishery, the stocks of codfish, has it been getting smaller and smaller, especially with the climate change and warming waters and things like that? Have you seen a decline in that fishery in that area?
Thank you for the question. There's no doubt that the cod stocks are in decline. As a member of the New England Fishery Management Council, we spend a lot of time managing cod. And one of the things that we're actually looking at is a new cod stock structure to determine a specific cod stock in southern New England in our area. And I've noticed that particular stock is actually starting to slowly uptick. We've had very restrictive fisheries regulations for several years now. And even on the recreational side, we've reduced catch significantly over time. And those regulations now are starting to show some success. And through the cod stock structure work they did, they determined that our stock of cod here in southern New England, the ones that spawn on Cox's Ledge, actually are genetically different than the cod in the Gulf of Maine or on George's Bank, and they can adapt to warmer water better than the other stocks. So I have a lot of optimism that if taken care of properly, codfish will rebuild and come back to the old days like I remember as a kid.
Thank you. I wasn't aware of that relative to the genetics, I guess, of the local cod. The only other point that I make on recreational fishing, as opposed to commercial fishing, are the limits on most of the fish that you talk about. I think sea bass, and I haven't followed this closely lately as I got too old to get up there on a boat, but the sea bass, I think the limit is 6. The tog, the limit's something like 3. Then in October, maybe it's 10, but they have to be over 16 inch. The tuna is like 1. So I mean, a lot of these have pretty severe limits, which hinders recreational fishing, in my opinion. But that's just a point that I am making. And if you want to comment on that, I'd be pleased to listen to you.
Sure, yeah, with the chair's permission.
No.
Was it a question to him?
Well, if he cares to comment on my statement relative to the very small limits and their impact to the recreational fishing. I mean, if you're going to go out on a charter boat, you can take 1 fish or 3 fish or 6 fish. I mean, it seems that that's as big a problem as some of these other things. I understand some of the other. You've got a lot of different fisheries here, and that's a good thing. And I enjoyed over the years recreational fishing, but I see things changing in that world, and you have to kind of go along with those changes. I'm just stating an opinion. There's no need to really comment.
Okay. Any other questions of Mr. Bellavance? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And our last witness is Chris Brown.
Mr. Brown was previously sworn. He's still under oath.
Hello again, Mr. Brown. Are you testifying in your capacity as a member of the Fishermen's Advisory Board?
Yes, I am.
Could you tell us what you do for work?
I'm a commercial fisherman for the last 46 years. I'm the owner of 2 small vessels. In my spare time, I'm the president of the Rhode Island Commercial Fishermen's Association, a member of the FAB, and I'm also the president of Seafood Harvesters of America, the largest organization of fishing groups in the nation, with membership from Alaska to Maine.
You just answered my following 4 questions.
Good.
What species do you commonly fish for?
We fish for fluke, flounder, whiting, mackerel, herring, squid, butterfish, sea bass, skate. I could go on and on and on.
Are you familiar with the Revolution Wind Project?
Yes, I am.
How?
Through my engagement, being forced out all I need to know about it on the FAB. And just being involved as the president of several organizations.
Were you commercially fishing in the area during the time the Block Island Wind Farm was being constructed?
We didn't dare fish immediately there because of the high level of traffic. It just wasn't good. You know, it's just not smart. So we stayed away. We did not fish there. It was, it looked like a monster truck pull for big vessels. There were huge ships everywhere.
Have you had occasion to observe the Block Island Wind Farm since it was constructed?
Yes. In the year following the construction, we experienced higher catches of codfish. This was prior to the system being turned on and electrified. We had some very good cod fishing around the bases of the turbines. I have good skills for buzzing obstructions. That's how I've made my living with a small boat for years. And we experienced some very good catch. And then the following year, when it was electrified, We went down from thousands of pounds for the season to being unable to fill a single fish tote less than 100 pounds. It was so bad that we did not return. Price of fuel and everything, you can't go looking around to your heart's content. You have to go where you can think you make some money. But it was clear to me that the electrification was a deterrent to cod in aggregation. And that when they represented simple vertical structure, it served as an attractant.
Now, let's turn your attention, if you don't mind, to the Revolution Wind project. You said that you reviewed materials.
Yes.
Okay. And based on your experience, what level of fishing activity occurs within those project areas?
Within the project area, there is scalloping and lobstering, not much trawling. As it is glacial moraine, high ground, boulders, nasty stuff. We tend not to trawl in those areas. But I cannot underscore how important it is to trawlers as a place for fish to go. They migrate to and from it, they spawn on it. It is critical, essential habitat for many of the stocks that I am dependent on. Given the seasonal nature of New England, things are rarely stagnant. They are either going to or coming from someplace. Cox's Ledge is a magnificent, unique structure in southern New England. And it serves as a place for fish to hang out, just be unassailed, if you would, or untargeted by us. We recognize the value of that kind of an area, if it is left natural.
With respect to project construction, and I'm talking about Revolution Wind, how will any delay to the construction schedule impact commercial fishing in this area?
It's gonna, our concerns are both spatial and temporal. The spatial are obvious, and the temporal only expand the magnitude of the problem. So delays go directly to our bottom line.
Based on your experience, how will secondary coverage of cables impact commercial fishing in this area?
Well, it's just another thing to tear your nets. Just another thing to send you home early. I ran into one on the east side of Block Island 2 months ago with a herring net, which barely tickles the bottom. It's just barely on bottom. And I did $2,800 worth of damage in about a nanosecond. Sent me home for the day. So it can become very expensive, very fast. And in a small boat, when you are fastened to the bottom on something that is bigger than you, it can get dangerous. Small boats, become unstable in lesser weather than bigger ones. And if we're hooked up to the bottom, trying to reel up a concrete mat, if you will, that must, I don't know how much they weigh, 10,000 pounds. We can't do it. We're anchored down. We have to cut something loose. Lose it all.
Based on your experience, how will the applicants moving of boulders impact commercial fishing in this area?
I think it is almost farcical that a company who is so compelled by profit, who can't manage simple radio communications, is going to pick boulders up and relocate them with pinpoint precision at a cost to themselves. That is farcical.
And lastly, what other effects from the Revolution Wind project do you expect to impact commercial fishing?
Well, I think after 10 years of construction, cumulatively, we will inherit an ocean that might be so scarcely populated with endangered species as to have it not be able to withstand a single accidental take from the commercial fishery. We are subject to the Marine Mammal Protection Act, the Endangered Species Act, the Magnuson Act. These other people are not. How is it we can invest $100 billion into a political fiat that does not even abide by the laws that you and I must? I'm worried about the science of these things evolving and recognizing them down the road for what they are. Tremendous ecosystem disruptors. A lot of you talk about grown fish. The danger to these things is in how they disturb photoplankton and zooplankton, the foundational pillars of systemic productivity. They tumble it. They bring things in the reach of ambient light that cannot stand it and die. They take things that are absolutely essential that need ambient light and deny it. They tumble the water column. I'm worried about that. It's been estimated 10% of systemic productivity will be reduced annually. 30 years of that. It's frightening. These things advance only in the absence of sound science, not in concert with it. We need to be careful. Unleashing $100 billion on the ocean is frightful. Capitalization will translate to environmental degradation with the smallest careless investment. So one that has downside that is being downplayed when expanded to 1,500 square miles and then multiplied by 10 up and down the coast. I just don't know. I don't know how we can strand the efforts of the Magnuson Act, growing fish back, getting fisheries management, having respect for critical habitat, essential habitat, and then having it washed away in a political fiat that runs from the edifying light of good science. I'm scared to death. Fishing's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
That's all the questions that I have, but
Any questions?
Any questions of Mr. Brown from the council? Ms. Hall?
I just had a quick question regarding the FAB's supplemental April 24th, 2023 mitigation measures.
Mhm.
And I was wondering about the applicability of all of these mitigation measures that have been suggested by FAB. First, is there any part of these mitigation measures, or maybe all taken, there's 19 of them as a whole, would these 19 mitigation measures sort of reduce your concerns and provide the kind of mitigation to this operation that, as a member of FAB and as a real leader in the industry, that you would feel a measure of, it's hard to say confidence, maybe a measure of understanding that your concerns were being heard by the applicant?
Yes, I think a lot of these leap off the table when you, the collision of big business development and small fishing industry, you know, a lot of things leap off the table. They just raise their hand and say, hey, we need to have this, we need to have that. But at the end of the day, we still feel as if we're rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. We don't think there's any level of mitigation that could ever offset the deleterious effect on the systemic productivity of the Atlantic Ocean. We should not be the recipients of it. We don't want money. We want a healthy ocean. We want an unfettered, healthy ocean. We want to have this endeavor go forward with the blessing of science as opposed to running from it. So we're very emotional and spiritual about our relationship with the ocean. You know, we screwed it up once in the 70s and 80s. We invested a couple of $100 million against the advice of the scientific community in rebuilding our old fleets. We didn't understand that the condition of the ocean was poorer than we believed. We finished the stocks off. I did. And then we passed Magnuson and we put some teeth on it. And it is what saves us. We have learned a hard lesson in preserving the integrity and the systemic productivity of the ocean. We don't want to go back. Capitalization translates to degradation if you don't have the complete scrutiny of science and the interest of ocean health, not small businessmen. Ocean health is something so much bigger. Half the oxygen we use tonight came out of the ocean. Systemic productivity feeds into oxygen production. So things as big as the ocean don't fix as easily as you'd like. We've been 30, 40 years fixing our mess up. We may never get to some stocks. Others we have. We've been the gold standard in the world for our respect for critical habitat, for our respect for spawning areas, and all of it. There is a religious kind of an arrangement that fishermen have with their grounds. It's sacred. And we get really upset when we're not thinking with our whole brain here. When a handful of politicians are thinking with bags of money in their dreams. So I guess these mitigation measures will help, but like I said, it's not a solution. And it's just a little Band-Aid. But like they say, when the elephants make love, the ants get trampled.
There's a picture.
Mr. Gomez.
Yeah, I concur with a lot of what you say, most of it. In fact, I have actually a couple of questions, but reality at this point is that Rhode Island has federal consistency. We're talking offshore waters, not under Rhode Island control. And we're trying to do the best that we can relative to mitigation and listening to you. And it's kind of like Solomon cutting a baby in half, so it stinks, right? But on the other hand, Massachusetts doesn't have federal consistency. We wouldn't even be here. Yeah. So Rhode Island, at least we get a shot at things that we can do. And so we're trying to invest on that. We've had a lot of continuances, and I don't know in this particular case if another one helps or not. Relative to losing the codfish around the Block Island structure, studies that I've looked at said the magnetic fields and things aren't the real problem, but I look at those structures and there's probably a lot of vibration because of the derrick type structure. And that may do it. I don't know. I'm not that kind of a scientist. We don't know. The monopoles are a lot different. And one of the things I'm really worried about is the noise factor. You put in your document, but you didn't mention, and I worry particularly about the squid because that's a Rhode Island with the best in the world. So I certainly get mixed emotions on this. You haven't discussed whales. You haven't. There's a lot of. Did you really?
Yeah.
Well, okay. I'll buy that.
If we're having an impact on the smallest creatures in the food web and the largest, how long before we discover that we're having an impact on everything else?
And I understand all that, but I still have to go back to the idea of federal consistency and trying to get as much as we can get and not having it buried when it gets to bone.
I will tell you the reason that this initiative has progressed as rapidly as it has in the state of Rhode Island is because it has had two cheerleaders in the form of two governors.
Yes. Yes.
If they had more testicular fortitude, I believe that they could have, given that these things plug into Rhode Island, commanded a little more authority. But instead, they chose to fatten themselves up, say, a little bit.
I remember when one of them promised to really support FAB and the fishermen.
Yeah.
And didn't. So
I agree with you.
And again, I'm with you. I understand.
We haven't even had a chance to meet this governor.
Yeah.
He won't talk with us.
Yeah. Which is a shame.
Yes.
So, But I still go back to the federal consistency and, you know, the
You know,
politics.
this industry didn't get into business to become a welfare state.
Yeah.
We were once proud, independent providers of food to the nation. Screwed it up, and now we're more proud than ever that we brought it back. And we've learned of how fragile the relationship is between the ocean and people that go to it. The hand of man blesses nothing that it touches. Narragansett Bay is clean, it's not overfished. There's 2 or 3 little boats that work there in the summer, but yet we can't get fish to grow back into it by virtue of light and noise and vibration and cables and all of it. The hand of man cumulatively and collectively has degraded the greatest treasure in Rhode Island. I pray to God that we can find a way to study the problems, find solutions to the problems. Look, my kids need green energy. My grandchildren do. Everyone's grandchildren and great-grandchildren do. But why must we accept environmental compromise as part of progress? Aren't we smart enough to not do that?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. We're gonna take a short recess for benefit of our stenographer right now.
Letters.
Well, stenographer is the key.
Oh, mad rush. I'm gonna be having 80-year-old.
Marissa, what else do you have?
Todd Gilbus, the economist. We are done.
Yep.
It's just Todd that's left.
Okay. All right, we'll take a quick break.
We'll stand over here.
With Steve.
So that Todd's present for about 15 or 20 minutes, and then we're done.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Busy. There's something for this size. We went out to. Been way out.
Yes. Sure, and this, we just start the meeting again, we might. It's not on channel 10. Okay.
All right. Back on the record, Coastal Resources Management Council, April 25, 2023. Attorney Desitel, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The last witness, Chris Brown, was the last witness for the FAB tonight, and we would like to turn it over to the FAB's expert economist, Mr. Todd Gilfus. He indicates that his presentation will be about 15 or 20 minutes, and I don't see a need for a Q&A with him. He's put together a very comprehensive presentation, so I'd like permission for him to just launch right in.
Launch.
Thank you.
Sir, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Gilfus. TODDGUILFOOS.
Thank you. Please proceed.
Thank you for having me. I'm an associate professor at the University of Rhode Island in environmental and natural resource economics. And in this role, I've been basically tasked with advising the FAB on economic valuation from this project. So to give a little background on this area, is the Revolution Wind lease area. Cable have $2.3 million in direct fishing revenue for Rhode Island annually. When we include additional businesses that provide and use the fisheries industry, we call these upstream and downstream industries, there's an additional $1.7 million of annual economic impact related just with this wind area. So the basis evaluation is when I was tasked with doing this, I pulled from a number of sources. I engaged many times with experts from the developer as well on lots of points. So I'm using guidance from BOEM about minimum compensation to inform some of my analysis. I'm using the FAB input into their fisheries and their business, into some of my estimates. Data provided from some surveys, existing reports, and working with RIDEM, and some of Huey's analysis that was based on VTR data of fishing catch, in which they came up with their estimates of impact. So I wanted to give an overview too, to understand what's included, what's not included in these types of economic valuations. So the mitigation process doesn't allow for a model deconfliction. So what that means is basically taking out areas from a lease that are highly used by other vessels. So NOAA currently has a deconfliction model that they use for newer leases. So the Gulf of Maine, Gulf of Mexico are using these, which essentially carve out areas where there's going to be high conflict over the resource, right? And so it reduces and makes mitigation easier. It also reduces literal conflict by eliminating some of those areas. So this project didn't go through that process. And therefore, it's impacting more valuable area that otherwise may have been excluded through that lease process.
And also has a larger impact on the fisheries than some other areas would that would go through that process. Another sort of issue with that is when they're siting individual turbines, there's really no process to weigh those benefits and costs against existing activity. So marine habitat. So I'm not talking about like protection of a specific glacial moraine, but I'm talking about how productive that area is to a fishing industry, right? So there's no really trade-off ever made. It's they're developing and they're mitigating through this process. So I wanted to focus, instead of going through an exhaustive sort of detail about an estimate that I come up with, focus on the differences that we have with the developers. So we've gone through this, you've heard we've had these weekly meetings and engaged with them on a number of issues. So these are the primary areas that I found that we have differences. So one is increased risk of fishing and transiting within a wind lease area. Lost ground to lobster and crab fishery. So just lost ground for being able to fish in certain areas. Impact to big game fishing, which we heard a bit about from previously, for example, tuna. Significant changes to ground, which we've also heard about previously, which is moving boulders, hangs on where the cable is, and something that I can speak to is an economic discount rate. So this is the rate of discount applied to impacts in the future, but putting them in today's dollars. This is a very common practice in economic analysis. So that the practice of using one is not controversial at all. It's regularly used. The issue is really twofold. Is one is there's no consensus on a single discount rate that should be used. In fact, government agencies use a wide variety of different discount rates in their cost benefit analysis. So for instance, Army Corps of Engineers uses like a 2.7 something discount rate, where some other reports use up to 7%. And academics follow this too. There's a pretty wide range. So, you know, there's some academic debates about what the appropriate discount rate is. So I'm going to talk a bit about this. I don't really have a academic debate with this. I think it's more a practical concern. So developers put forth a 5% discount rate on all future impacts. So assuming we estimate those impacts correctly, this would mean to be solvent. So we're setting up a trust fund to pay claims for fishermen in the future based on these impacts, right? So to be solvent, what the fund must do is it must earn back that 5% plus inflation. And the way that these deals are structured, these trust funds are structured, all the management fees, so the claims processing and the management of the money must come out of interest, right? So our fund needs to earn 5% plus inflation. Long-term inflation is around 2.5%. It's higher now, but that's a long-term inflation rate, plus management fees, which could be significant. So more than 1%, up to 2% in the early years of the trust fund for Vineyard Wind. So that means to me that we need to cover somewhere around 9.5% returns just to make that money pay the claims it was meant to, right? I find that implausible because this is a trust fund that's going to be paying out funds each year, much like an insurance company would. So an insurance company, if you look at any insurance company balance sheet, they don't invest in all like Tesla stock. They have lots of fixed income securities because they have to be solvent to pay those things in the next 6 months and the next year and the year after and so on. And so when you're earning a really good return on fixed income, you know, you're earning like 6.5% with some risk. So I find it basically implausible for these to be solvent if we're correct about the size of the economic impacts. So I suggest that they use a lower discount rate as a practical matter and just to be responsible with setting up these trust funds. To put this in monetary terms, say I've proposed using a 4% discount rate, which would add almost $1 million to the ultimate settlement package, right? So it's not insignificant. It's not, we're not talking like 20 grand of a difference. Okay, so another difference that I've had And the FAB has is with commercial fishing and operational losses from commercial fishing. So BOEM has provided some draft guidance on what mitigation should include. It's fairly vague, but it has some pretty key components in there, which includes a drawdown of 5 years. So they have like 100% of revenue should be covered in the first year after, drops down to 80%, 70, 60, 50%. And that part of the guidance is being followed in the commercial side by the developer. So they've put that into the compensation package. What it also says in there is that that's minimum. That's a minimum requested for mitigation, and that we should consider project by project operational impacts. So things that are going to extend longer than 5 years. So there could be some learning impacts from the farm, and that would be covered by this. But anything more permanent needs to be compensated, needs to be included in valuation. And so there's significant risk of fishing in turbine fields, which isn't included in this estimate. So these risks will mean avoidance of the area, which reduces revenue. It could mean I need to hire another crew member to watch out for turbines while I'm fishing, because you can't just go with autopilot now through these big areas. And so there's clearly some impact to that. So we've assumed in our offer in this process, we've assumed a 30% loss over the remaining life of the project. And so how we came up with this is essentially based on really lost ground and lost fishing access due to two big reasons. So one is, I don't know how familiar people are with this gentleman's agreement, but this gentleman's agreement basically decides where landings occur for mobile and fixed gear. So this is going to get disrupted at the very least when turbines, because a number of the trawling and dredging goes through the lanes where there's turbines. So they're going to have to move. They're going to have to adjust, right? Which mean the fixed gear guys like the lobster crab are going to also have to adjust. They're going to lose ground from that. So I've estimated, based on talking with the lobster and crab fishermen about this, that we'd expect an approximate loss of 30% of their fishing grounds based on these changes. And the developer maintains that this is essentially a $0 impact over the operations. So that's a point of disagreement. Another is boulders moving. So boulders are going to basically change where we can fish. It's going to lose ground in some cases, and it might change habitat. So again, there's clear impacts, and moving through the operational phase, these are valued at $0. So it's a point of contention for us. And to get a sense, because actually there is an example of a fishery that has been impacted by development, is in the Irish Sea. So these are two pictures before and after development. You can see the wind areas in yellow, development areas. The little green dots are basically DMS pings from vessels. And there is an academic study from this data that showed that before and after, so not including construction, after construction, the operational losses to some of these fishing farms were pretty dramatic. So there was a 77% decline in fishing in the trawling from these areas. When they interviewed the vessel captains, they said the changing ground, the risk and gear entanglement were the primary causes for avoiding this area. So they didn't want to fish between the turbines. They viewed it as a high risk activity, and the changing ground, meaning putting covering over the cable as well as boulders, didn't make it profitable. And 82% of those local fishermen also indicated they didn't make this up in other areas. It was a net loss for them. So the other impact that we talked about was big game fishing. And so To help me understand this, I did a survey of recreational fishers from the Rhode Island Saltwaters Anglers Association to ask them about their fishing practices, what species do they go for in Revolution? How do they project or change it in trips might occur? And from that, we received an expectation that 28% of them expected to fish less often because of the turbines. So there's definitely not a monolithic effect. So there's going to be some people that want to fish next to these, but net, we're going to see a decrease on these. And it's mainly driven by these big game fish. So that seems to be the concern from the recreational crowd, is that the big game fish are going to be obstructed when they're fishing. And again, there's $0 in impact on operations from both recreation and from for hire. So I don't find that reasonable. That's part of our analysis. So to bring this up is to what do I think total exposure is? So when we think about the total 30-year lease, if we use it in nominal terms, there's $120 million of exposure. If we discount that to the present value of today in 2022 dollars, it's $66.5 million. And these are numbers that are not disputed between the parties. It's using the baselines from what we come up with. But my analysis suggests that commercial, because of mainly these operational impacts that we've talked about, is $19.6 million in present value. For hire is $1.2 million, and recreational is $860,000, which is significantly different than the current mitigation factor. And like I said, most of this is operational impacts, and it significantly diminishes over time. So it's not like we're expecting 100% loss. This doesn't become a marine protected area to get to this, type of impact. I also am suggesting a study of commercial fishing losses. So because there's so many points of disagreement about what's going to impact operational on the fishing side, I feel like a prudent thing would be to fund a study where we can get a good pre and post effects on Revolution, as well as some control areas. We've been in talks, but I'm not sure that we've reached agreement on the details of this. But I propose that RIDEM would be in charge of this study, and they're on board with that and suggests to move forward with it, and needs funding from the developer to occur. And so my last point is a couple things. There's really no recourse to the industry after these get passed, after these get cited and built. So there's really nothing they're going to be able to do except go to these trust funds. And if they're underfunded, that's going to be a problem. The impact doesn't include a lot of other things that the fishermen have brought up, such as their quality of life. This is going to impact their way of living. And so that's not included, just to put it in context. And in my discussions with them, while this is the estimate that I brought forth and recommend, it was very clear to me that even for a higher level of compensation, they would be willing to forego that if this weren't to be built. Like, that's how important it is to them. To me, that's in economics, we call that a revealed preference, which is basically a true valuation from them. So they hold that this is a very important and area to them in their industry. So that's all I have.
Any questions of the council? Okay, thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Thank
Go
you. I
ahead.
just wanted to say that wraps up the FAB's presentation tonight. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thanks. We had Attorney Main.
Yeah, we have no time. think you need to say it, yeah. These people get nervous, they try one nervous too.
Can't share with them, like I said. That's what I'm about. Everybody's together. Say it.
Just say yes. Got it, till 10, yeah. She doesn't agree up to.
Right.
Speaking.
Before you begin, for yourself and the benefit of the public, we have discussed with Capitol Police and we do have the room for at least one more hour after 9, so we have till 10. So I don't want you to rush and I don't want the public to feel that they will not have an opportunity to be heard. So do your full presentation and then we'll move on.
Thank you very much.
You're
We
welcome.
appreciate that.
Thank you to the Capitol Police.
You're all night, aren't we?
Please proceed.
Thank you very much. My name is Robin Main, and I'm here tonight with my partner Christine Dieter from Hinkley Allen, representing the applicant Revolution Wind. And we appreciate the council's time tonight, and we appreciate all the time and effort that the staff and Director Willis has made on this consistency review over many, many months. There have been countless meetings, including people giving up Thursday nights, including FAB members and Dr. Guilfoy's and the Desitel law firm, so that we could have very fruitful discussions on Revolution Wind and the analysis of the project under the enforceable policies of CRMC. And we want to thank you again for all the work and your presentation tonight and the staff recommendation. For this evening's presentation, because this is a consistency review and not your typical hearing, each one of our witnesses is going to do a presentation straight through, much like you just saw with Dr. Goodwin. And what we're going to do first is present you with the background of the project that Kellen Ingalls will provide you. Then we'll go on to Gareth Ellis, who is the package manager on the cables for the project. Ms. Holm will provide a short presentation, and then Kellen Ingalls will come back and talk about the compensatory mitigation package, as well as other mitigation elements of the project. So I'd like to first have Kellen address the council, please.
Sir, please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
My name is Kellen Ingalls, Kellen Ingalls.
Please proceed.
Thank you. I want to underscore what Robin just said and thank CRMC staff and the council for making all this time, the members of the FAB, their attorneys, subject matter experts, that a lot of time has been spent on this and I really appreciate it. I was before this council for the category B proceeding. In state waters, the northernmost part of the green line on this map, we're here now to talk about the federal waters, where that green line continues into the sailboat shade east area, as the Revolution Wind Farm. So I think Kevin Sloan did a great job of describing the project, and I won't dwell on that too much as part of the staff recommendation, but we have significantly modified the project from its original 100 turbine positions to now 79 that are under consideration, ultimately to build 65. So I also want to thank the staff for working with us on what that looks like and getting us through that process. Maybe let's go to the next slide. So I apologize if it's hard to see, but turbine positions that were removed are represented with red X's on this, and I'll move on to the way so you can see. You'll also see that they correspond with some really colorful areas that represents boulder density, with red being the most dense. That's also where glacial moraine is located. So you can see that we've eliminated the area west of South Fork, for example, from consideration. And I know that that's a very sensitive fishing at that location.
Recording in progress.
There are also a number of locations right in the middle of the wind farm that are similarly placed right inside of full moraine and complex habitat that we've removed from consideration. So what's left here is 79 positions. So we have those, we have a series of interarray cables in between those positions, connecting them. We have two export cables coming to shore from two offshore substations as well. I can have the next slide, please. I'll illustrate some of the micrositing that was just also described by Kevin. So these turbine positions are on a 1x1 nautical mile grid, which is established for ease of navigation, among other effects. If you just place those lat and long 1x1, some of them end up right inside of glacial moraine, which is represented here by the dark brown areas. We've gone through great effort to move those turbines within the micrositing diamond that you can see here that we have available to us under that agreement and with our federal permitting. So that I'm happy to say we can avoid glacial moraine with all of our turbine positions, and that's including the scour protection. So that's permanent impact to glacial moraine from the foundations. And next slide goes into what we do with the array cables to microsite those. So you see where these turbine positions could be connected. And again, I apologize if the colors are hard to see, but these direct yellow lines, the straight lines, are where we could go the most direct route in between turbine positions to connect them. We've routed around glacial moraine wherever possible and individual boulders to avoid them, to avoid having to move them during installation. So this is just one example of some of the efforts we've gone to really minimize impacts of the wind farm to glacial moraine and other boulder impacts. Thank you. I want to talk really quickly about construction schedule. Essentially, the construction will take place in 2024. So in January, we start with seabed preparation. And that leads to foundation installation and turbine installation starting in May. Scour protection takes place in the early part of the year as well, followed by a cable installation starting in July of 2024. And then once you get to the end of the year, if necessary, remedial works will take place. So with that, I want to, I can take questions if there are any on what I've presented here right now. I'd like to send it over to our to my colleague Gareth Ellis to talk about the cables package. But I also want to state that we agree with the staff conclusion. Project is consistent with enforceable policies.
Any questions of the council? Okay, please proceed.
Our next witness is Gareth Ellis.
Please raise your right hand. You swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Please state your name and spell it for the record.
It's Gareth Ellis, GarethEllis.
Please proceed.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm the electrical package manager for Revolution. That encompasses all the cable supply and installation. I'm sorry, you have to speak up a little bit. Sorry, yeah, I'll move a bit closer to you. So that encompasses all the cable supply and installation and the HDD package. And the what? HDD, sorry, horizontal directional drilling. I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the key basics behind our installation and trenching, and hope to support the fact that we are using some of the best tools in the industry and the best practices to ensure we get the burial and reduce the maximum protection. Obviously, so I'll talk to you trenching basics, how we're going to do some seabed preparation and our burial technique. So the same way as for state waters, we have the same burial requirement in federal 4 to 6 feet for all cables. We will be trenching the export routes from the state waters into federal waters with the same equipment we've used when we discussed in the Cat B, for the same vessel, with the same plough, with the same secondary jet trencher, supported from the same vessel as well. In the array fields, we have a slight difference. We're laying the cable first and then returning with a jet trencher and a mechanical trencher. Now, if we do not the burial depth 4 to 6 feet in the first pass, we refer to the cable burial risk assessment. Well, that is a large document, a large piece of engineering work, taking all the seabed analysis that we've made and all the fishing traffic, fishing activity, vessel traffic, and all the other human activities that could either affect our cable or we could create some issue for that cable, for that activity. And it's put into a calculation. And out of that becomes a risk factor. And we have a depth that we allowable to trench the cable to, which is below that risk of aggression from outside sources. If we do not reach that in the first pass, attempt to jet it for the second pass, and only after we've gone through all that process would we place secondary. And we say 10% here, that's what's in our request, but we are attempting 0%, of course, with the type of equipment that we use, although we can't guarantee that. Next slide. So just to go back to the SIGA preparation, so before we start trenching, we need to relocate some boulders. That's to stop the risk of damage to our equipment, risk of damage to the cable, should mean more problems and more seabed being used to create joints and things like that. There's two processes here. We've talked a little bit about the boulder grabs before. So both on the export route and the array routes, and for the area around the foundations where we'll be putting the monopile, we'll be removing boulders, relocating boulders, as discussed by Kellen and others previously, moving into location, which will be pre-formatted on our navigation system, and it will be decided before we actually hit the site. We'll know exactly where the boulder we want to remove, where we want to put it afterwards, and it'll be on the navigation screen on the vessel itself. So the operator with this tool itself has a bank of screens and telemetry, which tells us exactly where that tool is in the seabed, and we know already where the boulder is itself. And the grab is like what you see in a fairground ride. It's lowered over the boulder itself, picks it up, and the vessel steps place it in the exact location. The telemetry has very high accuracy within the region of half a meter, so we know that we're going to get good accuracy where we place the boulders, and we know where they're going to be put. In the red box there, just at the top of the wind farm area, a small section, 10 kilometers, where there's a large collaboration of boulders. And it's simply not efficient to move every single one with the boulder grab. We'll be using the valve here, which is pulled by a vessel and pushes the boulders apart, leaving an area behind where the cable will be installed after. This slide just shows where we'll be using the tools. On the export route, we're using that plough, that simultaneously laying burial. There'll be no cable left on the seabed, except where the joint is. That's a short term until it's jointed when the vessel returns. So we will be laying the cable and burying it at the same time on the export route. The cap jet there is there to support us if we burying the joint itself. And when we move closer to the offshore substation, we'll also need it to bury the cable at the end of where the plough finishes. In the array routes, as I said before, we lay the cable first, we return with the jet trencher and the mechanical cutter. And we have mixed soils, as we've all been discussing here. So where we jet trench, we'll be jetting in the soft soils. We do acknowledge there's more difficult and complex soils. So all our routing and these two trenching machines will be allocated to exactly the right type of sediment. And in that way, we're reducing as maximum as possible the amount of secondary protection that we might see at the end of the project. Just to recap on secondary protection, there's 3 potential types: rock firms, mattresses, and rock beds. Yeah, I think that's it. That's where I'm at.
Any questions of Mr. Ellis?
Yeah, are you using any sub-bottom profiling, acoustic profiling to help you lay the cable so that you don't run into obstacles?
Yeah, there's sonars on the front of the machines. We've also done a debris.
Are you doing that prior to
Yeah,
routing or during the routing?
exactly. As part of the seabed preparation, we'll be ensuring there's nothing that can be in the way of the cable.
And one thing that hasn't been made clear to me, on occasion, you're going to have to probably put down pads. And if you put down any cement pads or anything to that effect, we would like, are we going to get a very precise location of those pads that the fishermen can use?
Yeah, we will use what they call an intelligent mattress frame. So the mattress is lowered to the seabed on what is essentially a remotely operated vehicle. It's got the same telemetry, it's got the same cameras, sonars, etc. So we get an exact picture of the seabed where we place this. We want to obviously line it up so it's in the optimum position.
And you'll have
our post survey will have a very accurate.
You'll have absolute coordinates on that.
Yeah.
And that will be provided.
Yes, that'll be charted. Yeah, absolutely.
All right, thank you.
Yes, Mr. Gang.
So if you do have to move a boulder, typically how far do you move it? Is it like a 10-foot or 100 feet or?
Yeah, so from the center line of the roof, we'll move it to 10 to 15 meters from that center line. That's to give us a space for the trenching equipment to ensure that we're not going to come into contact with the size of the equipment that we're using. The plow is up to 10, well, I think it's 9 meters wide in total. We want to make sure that we're well clear of that center line.
Ms. Hall.
I have 2 follow-up questions on this boulder moving. You heard earlier from the fishermen, really deep concern regarding boulder relocation. My first question is, how has the applicant responded to those concerns constructively relative to their specific concerns regarding the impact of that to their habitat of their commercial target species, the schedule for boulder moving, and communication of the location of where those boulders are going? That also was raised by one of the earlier witnesses.
In that respect, all I can really speak to is the positioning. So we will be placing the boulders to as close as possible, grouping them. Once we take them off the center line, and as I said before, we'll have a very accurate position of that. We use the same telemetry as you use on a subsea, a remotely operated vehicle. I think one of your questions was about the habitat, which is something which I.
Well, no, how is that going to be communicated to the commercial fleet?
Okay, so it will all be charted. A part of the as-built survey, once we complete the works, will be available.
And what about the schedule? Have you committed to staying within a particular schedule to not cause disturbance in particular months?
Yes.
With respect to the boulder moving?
Yes, sorry.
If I could, I can actually.
Mr. Chair. May I have a moment?
Yes.
Mr. Engels has more of the answers to your questions. And so if you would allow Mr. Engels just to provide those answers.
That's fine.
Thank you. I didn't mean to butt in. I apologize. So I may need repetition of the questions, but I'll see if I can take them in order. On the boulder relocation, we've committed to grouping boulders wherever practicable. So as we're going along and we need to pick up a boulder, we have the option of dropping it where it's easiest or placing it someplace where it makes sense. So grouping with other existing boulders so that we reduce new snag potential and we group to keep it within its existing habitat. So we've committed to doing that during the boulder relocation and the installation.
When you say makes sense, do you mean makes sense to the fishers?
This was a specific request from the Fisheries Advisory Board that we group boulders as we moved out, and we agreed to that.
And then what about the schedule relative to boulder moving? Have you committed to a particular schedule and to like blackout areas where you're not going to move boulders?
On the schedule, no, we haven't. We've indicated what time of year we'll be doing that seabed preparation. And I'd say it's a pretty wide window.
Have you talked about limiting that window at all relative to what the concerns are from the commercial and recreational fishers?
That's really a federal issue that we work with BOEM on the specific schedule for the installation of the wind farm. So no, we have not.
Thank you.
Please continue.
Mr. Ellis has concluded his presentation.
Okay.
Our next presenter is Captain Pike Hall from Woods Hole.
Sir, please raise your right hand. Do you swear or affirm to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Please state your name and spell it for the record.
Name is Hauke Kite Powell, first name Hauke, last name Kitepowell.
Okay, please keep your voice up and proceed.
Okay. So the question that we addressed in the Woods Hole report on Revolution Wind is, what is the value of commercial and charter fishing from the lease area and the cable route? And what is likely to change in that value as a result of the construction and operation of the wind farm? We base our analysis on data from NOAA on fisheries, on commercial fisheries, landings and values. And we conducted, with help from Rhode Island and Massachusetts state agencies and others, a survey last year of the charter fishing fleet that uses the waters around the lease area. So that gives us our baseline values, and we assume that those would continue to be realized in the future if the wind farm were not constructed. We also calculate indirect and induced effects from those landed values and revenues from the commercial and charter fishing industry for Rhode Island. And all of that is similar to the process that Todd described previously. And we estimate what we think is likely exposure of those values during construction, operation, and decommissioning of the wind farm. The baseline economic values that we estimate are summarized here. And these numbers you've seen before. With the multipliers, it's about 1.8 million in economic impact to Rhode Island from commercial fisheries per year. And about $450,000 from charter fishing per year. Those are the baseline values. We then look at exposure due to construction, and we take into account the effects of the noise associated with the installation of the turbine towers, in that it will cause mobile species to leave the area. The installation noise will have effects on non-mobile species in the vicinity of the turbine towers, and the development of the foundations around the towers will impact those non-mobile species. In addition to these effects, we also assume that there's constrained access to fishing to the wind lease area during construction and to the export cable corridor during construction. The major effect here is from the fact that there's constrained access and that finfish are likely to leave the area where the construction noise is. And we assume that they stay out of that area for an entire year. So those are the assumptions behind the species impacts and the constrained access during construction. During operations, we consider the area around the turbine towers that will be effectively unavailable to fishing. And we make a conservative assumption that even though the immediate effect around the towers extends for less than 100 meters, that an area up to 250 meters around the towers is effectively unavailable to fishing. And that leads us to our estimate of 5% loss during operations on average. We recognize, as Todd mentioned also, that the exposure effects may be concentrated in the early years of the project. We don't make explicit assumptions about what that learning curve will look like. And our 5% estimate is an average over the life of the project. I want to note also that in coming to this conclusion, we did look at studies like the one that Todd cited from the Irish Sea to see what could be learned from that. One distinction is that those Irish Sea wind farms are built with a turbine tower spacing of about 500 meters. So those turbine towers are spaced 5 times more densely than those of the project that's under consideration here. And so that has a significantly different kind of effect during operation. That makes sense. Our assumption about decommissioning is that the effects will be similar to construction, but less severe because there's less noise. And this last slide shows the summary of what we estimate to be the present value of those exposure impacts for the project. They total about $3.5 million for commercial fishing with indirect and induced effects, and about $450,000 for charter fishing for Rhode Island-based fishers. That's the end of my slides. Happy to answer questions.
Any questions from the council? Thank you.
Thank you, Helga. And our last presenter is Kellen Engels, who will talk about the mitigation factor.
Still under oath.
Still under oath, thank you. I thought it might be useful first we are in receipt of the mitigation measures that were sent by the FAB to CRMC, and some of them we can work with them on. Others are up to the federal level considerations that we're undergoing right now. I thought it'd be helpful to walk through those and discuss what we're going to work with them on. For starters, if it involves communication, the answer is absolutely yes. I don't think it'd be useful to read them verbatim, so I'll just make reference to them if that's okay. The first one is basically efforts undertaken to avoid interactions and a specific agreement on monitoring vessels. And we can agree to that. Revolution will have 2 boats performing 24-hour monitoring where necessary. We also don't want to overdo it if we don't want to put too many boats in the water if that's not the best thing. So where necessary, when any cables are laid but not yet buried, that seems agreeable to us. At other times, Revolution Wind will communicate through its regular channels, including mariners briefings and radio channels. So communication, absolutely. That's really important to us. The second condition addresses maintaining records of daily operations. All of our vessels will broadcast AIS, so positional data will be available in real time. It's available publicly, real time, and through the US Coast Guard and many other sources. So that also seems very doable. The third is a request to break up, to broken project parts or equipment that cannot be retrieved shall be buried at least 2 meters below the seafloor. This one we can't agree to. It implicates certain federal regulations. For example, the EPA might have something to say about that, whether or not we can do that. So that, and the Coast Guard. So that's really a federal consideration. Fourth is a blanket speed restriction of 10 knots. We do intend that certain ships traveling in federal waters will have a maximum speed of 10 knots, but that doesn't apply to all areas. So it's a little more nuanced than that. So we can't agree to a blanket speed restriction, but I think we're aligned with places. Number 5 is no construction in November and December. We have to work with the federal agencies on that one. That one we need to leave to agencies like NIMS and BOEM. Number 6 is developer will install no more than 64 turbines. We can't agree to that. We are, however, agreeing with the staff's condition related to foundations. The construction exclusion area is to be minimized by dividing project construction into minimum of 2 phases. We are not doing construction exclusion areas, and we can't agree to divide the project construction into 2 phases. That's just not part of what we're here to talk about tonight. Allowing fishing vessels with static gear inside the wind farm during construction. We can agree to that. There, again, will be no limitation, no restriction on navigation or use. And we're really committed to coexisting, so we have no issue with that whatsoever. We just ask for close coordination between fishing vessels and Coast Guard and everybody we have out there for safety. There was also there was a construction schedule provided by the FAB, which we can agree to. That's again, a federal consideration. Our schedule has a number of considerations, our PPA requirements, our construction methods, time of year restrictions, et cetera. So we need to balance all of those factors. Number 10 is radar system upgrades, agreeing to work with multiple retailers, provide a list of multiple options for fishermen. We can absolutely work with fishermen on this. That's no problem. Number 11 addresses a fisheries management plan. Staff recommended condition 3 really addresses this. So I think we're there. Number 12, cables should share corridors and minimize the total cable footprint. The example I showed earlier with microsighting cables, so it shows that a shorter cable isn't necessarily avoiding impacts, nor is it the best idea. So we really can agree to this blanket condition to minimize total cable footprint. But it is in our interest to group cables wherever possible, avoid glacial moraine, and I think we're aligned on that point. Number 13 is about coordinating with neighboring lease areas. Orsted was a leader in getting industry agreement in the uniform 1 by 1 nautical mile spacing across the Massachusetts, Rhode Island lease area, wind energy area. And that provides for hundreds of lanes of transit. So there's already that coordination taking place. Number 14, about monitoring safety threats. That's all addressed at a federal level too. Those are conditions that'll be applied to us as part of federal permitting. Number 15, same conditions under construction shall be applied for decommissioning. BOEM takes an approach where they will look at a very specific decommissioning plan later on in the project so that we can consider the latest means and methods. We don't know everything that's going to be available to us down the line. So saying that the same conditions apply to construction also apply then does not seem like something we should agree to. Number 16 is about adequate funds for decommissioning. We can agree if we're talking about fisheries mitigation, that's been a specific part of the direct compensation fund consideration all along. Almost through them. Number 17 says that there are 13 sites in glacial moraine, and this isn't accurate. As I said earlier, we've microsited all of our turbine foundation locations outside of glacial moraine. So that includes scour protection too. So there's quite a bit of avoidance of permanent and temporary impacts. Number 18, in the event of a leak, this condition that's also addressed at the federal level, and that'll be a COP requirement, construction operations plan. And then a study of commercial losses to operations. We have had really good discussions on that, and I think we can agree to the study, which I'll get more into here in a moment. With that, I can get into the compensatory mitigation package that we've proposed and a little bit of the road we've taken to get there. You heard from Woods Hole that their analysis indicated an approximately $3.9 million loss over the life of the wind farm. Our first offer on February 15th took that and added a ramp down in the first few years of the project to accommodate and to consider that learning period over the first few years. Since then, through many additional discussions, we've gone ahead and fully adopted the BOEM recommended guidance that has been issued, where in year one of operations, it's assumed a 100% loss. Year two is 80%, and then it cascades downward to year 5, where it's 50%, and then 5% losses from year 6 onward throughout the life of the wind farm, as assessed by Woods Hole. So our final mitigation offer that was sent on April 18th includes $11.5 million for commercial fishing, $500,000 for charter fishing, $300,000 for a community fund. That community fund is really aimed at a broad scope to help the fishing community, including private recreational fishing in the area. We also have an effect study. Again, I'll go into that in a moment. The dollar amount that came out of discussions with a lot of stakeholders was approximately $300,000, and we've agreed to pay for that. Another aspect of this, Revolution Wind is taking part in our regional navigation fund. So that's why it's $333,333, very specific. 1/3 of $1 million fund that helps with training and acquisition of upgraded radar materials, radar equipment. That's that condition that was alluded to earlier with having some options available to fishermen. It also includes training opportunities like our simulator in Middletown, which you can see what it's like to navigate through a wind farm by standing in a simulated boat and going through it. And that brings us to a total of $12,933,333. And we can move on to the next slide, please. The project effects study was an idea brought to us by Dr. Gilfuss, and we've put a lot of thought into it as a group, all of us, Woods Hole, Revolution Wind, Fisheries Advisory Board. And we agree on, from our perspective, the purpose of this should be to use reliable scientific methods and data to address concerns about uncertainty of operational impacts on commercial fishing. So you heard there's a bit of a professional disagreement on the operational impacts for the life of the project. This really addresses that. We can take a look at it. We can reflect if it needs to be adjusted up or down. And again, I mentioned that we will provide funding, $300,000 for this study. The approach is to assess the impacts of fishing activity from Revolution Wind within the wind farm area and a buffer zone. So it's a regional approach. The anticipated focus would be lobster and Jonah crab and trawling. And that it'll take into account changes in programs, stock status, tag limits, etc., to try and isolate what effects are caused by the wind farm itself and not other factors that are making fishermen's lives difficult. The results, if the study concludes that the estimated actual losses caused by Revolution Wind to commercial and for-hire charter fisheries are greater than the anticipated potential losses, Revolution Wind will agree to an adjustment mechanism to pay the difference to the trust we are agreeing to set up, similar to the Category B funds, subject to a cap of $5 million. And if the study concludes that estimated actual losses are less than anticipated potential losses, the trust will pay the difference back to Revolution, subject to a cap of $2.5 million. And I believe that is what we have on the study. Okay, so that's the study. We respectfully request that the council approves the mitigation package of $12,933,333 plus the project effects study. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Any questions of Mr. Ingles? Mr. Gomez?
That's in today's dollars that you're talking about.
It is, yes.
It is. I guess one of the, and we don't have data on the adjustment mechanism and things that's downstream. You just have agreed to do that, right? One of the things that bothers me just a little bit is we're going through a period of very high inflation over the last couple of years, hugely high. And the cost of fishermen on fuel and things like that. There's a lot of cost increases. The price of fish is unpredictable, probably upwards. I know when I go to market, fish is very expensive. So the loss of their income probably is impacted by the inflation factors. And I would think that we'd want to maybe increase it 10% or something to try to keep up with that and stay ahead of that. At this point, is that a reasonable thing or is that not a reasonable thing?
I don't think it's something that we can do.
At this point,
Really just if Mr. Ingles can respond to.
The numbers that have been, and maybe Woods Hole would want to weigh in on this too, but the numbers that have been calculated, their impact assessment are gross numbers, and so they don't subtract for those.
for the increasing costs and loss of revenue for and an increased price on the product.
Right. So in other words, it's conservative favoring the fishermen in that regard.
You think?
Well, just the costs haven't been, again, this is more of an economist.
Yeah. No, I'm just
discussion, but
we're having a discussion here and I'm just trying to understand what's going on. It is today's dollars and this is the numbers you've come up with. You explained it. From your viewpoint, understandably, so.
Right. So their gross numbers, there's a discount rate applied. And I guess I would defer the specific discussion on the economics of that to the experts, but
how is the trust set up? Who sets that up?
It will be done just like
The same as
the same as state
Okay,
waters,
I got
that's
it, I
correct,
got it.
into a trust with a.
It worked out, yes.
Well, we're not through all the permitting yet, so, but the trusts are available.
Yes, okay, thanks.
Yes, Ms. McGovern.
Can you elaborate on the decommissioning process a little bit?
Sure.
Sure, so there are two issues. Is it decommissioning as it impacts the mitigation fund numbers, or is it? the
No, just
decommissioning fund
overall,
for-
whether it's in the middle of the useful life or the end of the useful life.
Right. So as a condition of the lease agreement we have with Boehm, we will have to submit a decommissioning plan at a later date to make sure that all of the funds are necessary, all of the means and methods are in place, approved by Boehm for that process. So as I said, that takes place later in the life of the project so that we can take a look at what technology is available, what advancements have taken place.
The bond posted or funds that are aside, once you decide on a number with bond.
I'm not sure the specifics of the bond or the.
A decommissioning bond is posted, that's my question, or funds that are aside, you know, you have to decommission.
Yeah,
the
I'm not-
turbine.
yeah, I apologize. I'm not sure the specifics of the bond timing or amounts.
In the, I guess, or in the past, like with past projects, if you had to post a bond. With a decommissioning bond or.
Oh, okay, right, so yeah, the financial assurance for South Fork?
Okay, yeah, absolutely. As an example, yeah.
Sure.
Okay, so that's something that you'll do for this as well then.
Yeah.
Okay.
If I may, I can expand upon that just briefly. There's also mechanisms that Boehm and I guess Bessie by extension has in place where if the decommissioning obligations for some reason can't be met, those funds would be forfeited with other enforcement mechanisms, including I believe criminal and civil action. Oh, sorry, there's the potential for Boehm and Bessie also have mechanisms in place. When it comes to the decommissioning aspect of a project where if for some reason decommissioning obligations cannot be met, that they would step in, they would essentially take that money that has been put down. And there's also potential avenues for various enforcement to everywhere from, compelling to also potential criminal civil, processes. These are outlined in a decommissioning white paper that's supplied by Boehm. It's referenced in the staff recommendation footnote. So that's available for anyone to access and reference.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, can you tell us how long the impact study will take? Based on operations, correct? Not construction.
Right, so there are two phases. First will take place in as early as next year to gather a baseline. And then the second phase will take place in about 2030, 2031 after year 5.
So that's when the decision will be made as to if the adjustment will be made in terms of adding or subtracting from the mitigation, like the 12, basically it's the 12.9 million that will increase or decrease by an amount based on that study.
That's the expectation. We still have to work on the mechanics of that exactly, but that's my expectation, yes.
Ms. Wall.
I have a question regarding the total exposure for loss. And we heard earlier that the total exposure anticipated is across the 30-year lease. And I'm wondering if you can account or explain the difference. It seems like there's a pretty big difference between the valuations made by FAB relative to that total exposure versus the commitment that the applicant is making relative to this 12.9. And let's leave aside the study for a minute. Just could you address that difference? Seems like it's like a $9 million difference.
Sure, so the operational impact as assessed by Woods Hole is a 5% loss across the average across the life of the project. And that's assessing a certain distance from each individual turbine. And as I said, there's a professional difference of opinion on that 5% versus 30% between the economists. So that's the purpose of the study is to.
What's the difference of opinion based on?
Sure. I mean,
Is that another question that he can't answer? That someone else has to answer?
well, the situation is we want to get you the most information that covers your question, and we're trying to be very efficient here in the meeting, so I can bring up Powell, who was just here to answer that question.
Yeah, I'm just trying to reconcile the offer with the ask relative to that particular difference in loss over total exposure of the lease.
Why don't you address that, please?
Do it from here.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I think
Not in-
the main basis for the difference is that the Woods Hole analysis, we assume that there's certain ground around the towers that's lost to fishing, but that the fishing industry will adapt to the presence of the towers and continue to fish in the other parts of the lease area, and generally get the same landings from those areas as they have per unit area previously. In the analysis that Todd presented, there are additional assumptions about the gentleman's agreement falling apart and not being replaced, and resulting loss of ground to the fixed gear fishery in particular. I think that's the bulk of the difference. So it's a difference in assumptions about how the industry will adapt to the presence of the.
So it's the assumption of the applicant that there'll be 0% loss based on there not being that 30% loss of grounds, and that there'll be an adaptation by the fishery, which will make it a net zero loss. Is that what you're saying?
5%.
5%. Yeah, excuse me.
30% that's estimated.
And if I could add, that period of adaptation is reflected by adopting the BOEM guidance.
I'm sorry?
That period of adaptation that Hauke alluded to is reflected by us adapting that BOEM guidance that starts year 1 unless it's year 5.
Thank you.
Any other questions at this point? Anything else? Mr. Gagnon?
In terms of the operational period, will there be like a point of contact that fishermen can call if they have a question or an issue that may come up so that they can get a quick answer on something while they're out there and clarify things?
The short answer is yes, absolutely.
So they'll know like a certain channel we can contact a
Yes.
person that will answer a question.
Paul?
So who would they have called last week if that had been this project? Like, who would they have reached out to?
Well, we heard about this through the Fisheries Advisory Board CRMC meetings that we had regularly established. That happened to occur on that Thursday, so that was the first time we heard about it. They could be in touch with any one of our fisheries liaisons. We have a website dedicated to fisheries communications. We have, and we can bring up members of our fisheries team to describe in greater detail all the things we put in place to communicate amongst the fishermen as we're out there. But this incident, I will say, has underscored the need for that communication. And it's a clear priority for us to make sure that everyone knows who to contact if they have an issue.
Any other questions? Okay,
We have no further witnesses. I'll make a brief statement now before public comment. We ask that the council issue a consistency concurrence with conditions as laid out by the staff. We also note that in a consistency process, compensatory mitigation cannot be commanded against the developer. But here, as you've heard from Mr. Ingles, Revolution Wind is committed to the mitigation package he put forth of $12.9 million that includes within it the draft zone guidance adaptation period, still continues with the 5% after that BOEM 5-year period ends, with 5% from that period to the end of the project. And also includes the study that we discussed, a study that will be done in 2 phases that the developer is committed to do, so that this dispute over, is it the draft BOEM guidance, is it another number, will be looked at again with the type of data-driven scientific approach that the Ørsted Eversource projects maintain. So we come to you with this full presentation of agreeing to the staff's conditions, making major modifications to this project over the course of this consistency review with the CRMC staff and with the mitigation package that we set forth tonight. And in response to one of the questions we had tonight, we will follow that same trust process, meaning deposit into the Fisherman's Viability Trust or Revolution Wind that was set up under the state process. So with that, I ask for the council's vote on the consistency concurrence.
thank you.
Thank you.
All right, I will now open up the public hearing on the matter. Just by show of hands, who desires to come forward and speak? All right, what we will do is start in the front row, left to right, and we'll just work our way back. You come forward, indicate your name. You guys swear in?
No, if I could, when the public speaks, I think they have a right to just speak. No need to swear you in because you're going to be, just giving your own views and everything else. So I get that's been the practice of this agency. There has been no objections to that. It allows for a freer exchange of ideas.
Yes.
Robin, you mind? So they can. Sure. Thank you.
Yep, no problem.
I only ask for record purposes that you state your name and spell.
Good evening. My name is Amanda Barker, AMADA, BARKER. I live in Providence and I'm the policy advocate at Green Energy Consumers Alliance. I'm also the Rhode Island State Lead for the New England for Offshore Wind Coalition. We are a regional coalition made up of environmental, academic, labor, business, and social justice organizations. And we're united by our desire to combat climate change and advocate for the responsible development of offshore wind. Offshore wind is the biggest lever that we can pull to meet our energy needs, reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, and address the climate crisis, all while creating local jobs and benefiting the economy. It also allows us to transition away from fossil fuels, which not only emit pollution, but threaten our grid reliability and increase energy costs. Rhode Island's reliance on fossil fuels leaves us vulnerable to price spikes from fossil fuel price volatility. Revolution Wind will produce enough clean energy to power more than 340,000 homes, displacing more than 1.7 million metric tons of carbon pollution, which is the equivalent of taking 370,000 gas-powered cars off the road. The 400 megawatts that Revolution Wind will supply to Rhode Island is crucial in achieving the Act on Climate, which requires that we reduce our emissions 45% by 2030 and net zero by 2050, as well as the 100% renewable energy standard by 2033, both of which are statutory and essential to combating climate change and creating a healthier environment in Rhode Island and throughout New England. Revolution Wind will also serve as a key driver of jobs, economic growth, and investment here in Rhode Island. The project will utilize both Port and Quonset Point for project development, construction, operations, and maintenance, creating thousands of local jobs. Concerning fisheries and marine life, I want to emphasize that we understand that there are going to be impacts, and the coalition strongly advocates for mitigation measures and fisheries compensation packages. But I want to underscore that we support offshore wind because we have to. Saying no to offshore wind is saying yes to natural gas plants polluting the air we breathe. It's saying yes to building more gas pipelines. It's saying yes to catastrophic impacts of climate change, which includes warming oceans and acidification that will negatively impact wildlife. So yes, impacts need to be addressed and mitigated, and we strongly urge that. But we believe that offshore wind can be developed in a responsible way that respects our environment and our wildlife. We don't need to choose between offshore wind and wildlife protection. We can do both. And in doing both, we're protecting wildlife from the greatest threat, climate change. We are in a climate crisis. The recent IPCC report made that very clear. It called for urgent action to mitigate catastrophic impacts from climate change. So I urge you to consider that when making your decision. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you. Next in the front row, starting this way, anyone?
Sir, please state your name.
My name is Tom Clemo. It is Tom is Tom and Clemo is CLEMOW. I, like many here, have read lots of material, and it's a difficult decision to say, have you read everything? I haven't. I've read several thousand pages. I don't know who's read everything in all the BOEM reports. There's a couple things that have been said tonight, and I just have 2 points. And one is my background is science. I have heard some comments saying, well, they don't know that for surety. And that's actually a case of that's science. It is not possible to know everything about all the manifestations of how this project, if going ahead, will affect fish and the commercial well-being of the fishing community. It is without a doubt the biggest uncertainty. I want to be sure that the argument that we don't know everything is a reason not to do this, because we do know the effects, as mentioned about, well, let's just stay with fossil fuels for a generation. We do know what those effects are. I don't think those are really in question. The second thing is just listening to the testimony, and I can understand how complex it is. There were some what ifs in terms of the project schedules, like, well, what if it goes longer and longer? The ORCID people talked about a schedule, and I think you asked a question sort of about, what about those schedules? It's the best they have. I know from my reading that, for example, with the monopiles, it is 1 per day. So they can only put in 1 per day. So if you think the number is 67, you can say weather's going to be influencing it. But the 6 months, for example, between May 1 and November 1, which is the North Atlantic right whale exclusion period, there's time to put all that in. So I wanted to, so 2 points. One, just because we don't know everything about everything, not a reason to say no, because you can never know it all. And second, schedules are important in terms of the BOEM obligations and what they've written. There are structured schedules and suggestions that, well, things could go on is an obstruction argument. That's all I have to say.
Thank you. Next.
My name is Lisa Quattrocchi Knight, and you spell it LISA QUATTROCKI, and then Knight, KNIGHT.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Oh,
Lisa
sorry.
Quattrocchi Knight.
QUATTROCKI. And then Knight, KNIGHT.
Lisa.
Lisa, sorry. So I actually have three different points that I wanted to make. First of all, thank you for letting me talk. I have not read the entire SAM, but I read Jennifer McCann's practitioner's guide to the ocean SAM. And so I know that you all have some ability to deny the permit or the consistency permit if they violate or they are have a major adverse impact on at least 5 different areas. And I wanted to talk, the first thing I wanted to say is about the navigation safety. So as a daughter of a Coast Guard seaman, I'm particularly worried about navigation safety. And on page 24 of the CRMC report, it states, quote, "Wind wake potentially creates a safety issue for mariners. The United States Coast Guard has expressed concerns that wake impacts on the surface circulation will alter their ability to model the surface for search and rescue operations." The report then states that the CRMC staff concludes that the developer's agreement to conditions 1 and 2, the decrease in the foundation numbers and the micrositing, makes the project consistent with the enforceable policy. I disagree with this statement because the very mitigation adjustments that they propose, namely the micrositing, will prevent any such mitigation of the safety concerns. So the Coast Guard states clearly in their public comments to Revolution Wind that are in the BOEM site, quote, "A key means to mitigate effects on safe navigation and Coast Guard missions is the adoption of a uniform grid pattern across the entire Massachusetts and Rhode Island wind energy area." And the idea that we're now going to microsite these foundations will conflict with the requirement to adhere to a symmetrical grid that's carefully placed. And as Kevin actually explained, the very idea of micrositing is going to not allow the construction to occur in a symmetrical way. So I also wanted to bring to the council's attention the fact that the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure in the U.S. Congress has been concerned about the Coast Guard's lack of involvement with insisting on their guidelines and their considerations taken into account. So the Committee on Transportation and Infrastructure wrote a public comment, and the congressmen who chair the committee are both the Democrat from Oregon, DeFazio, and Graves, the Republican from Missouri. And they wrote, in 2019, the Coast Guard's notice of availability of the Massachusetts and Rhode Island Sport Access Route Study failed to incorporate findings and comments provided by the fishing community that highlight safety and transiting concerns. These concerns went beyond the general siting of offshore energy leasing areas, touching on navigational safety, search and rescue capabilities, and the effect that turbine arrangements are known to have on radar interference. So I just wanted to say one thing about this radar interference. So Ørsted commissioned a study by DNV-GL Energy to evaluate radar scattering and also the ability to detect targets. And unfortunately, they use this with 5 megawatt turbines, not 11 megawatt turbines. So these are much smaller turbines. And the study concluded that radar returns from structures limited target detection when vessels were within 100 meters of turbines. If the microsighting allows for 500 feet of variability, the vessels will not be able to detect them with radar and they won't know that they're there. So the study that I referred to before concluded that there was an inability to affect surface rescues within wind farms in restricted visibility, and that tracking by vessel or shore-based marine radar of helicopter movements within wind farms was generally poor. So given these tragic flaws in navigation safety, I strongly encourage the CRMC to deny the permit for the Revolution Wind Farm. As the Rhode Island Ocean SAMP correctly claims, the public safety should take precedence over a for-profit energy company's aims. The CRMC has the right to deny the permit based on concerns for navigational safety, and now actually has a responsibility to do so, given your now understanding of the project's failure to protect the public. So I could end on that, but unfortunately, like my father, the Coast Guard seaman, I talk too much, and I'm going to continue to make 2 other points. And my first point is that the Ocean SAMP also identifies that transparency should guide the development of all documents and procedures related to these projects. That was on page 18 of the practitioner's guide. This must include the transparency by the project's developers. The public deserves to have access to information that will determine whether the project actually complies with the SAMP. Orsted fails to meet the stipulation. They have kept 25 out of their 51 appendices as confidential. And these are not just appendices that would have trade secrets. These include the economic development benefits of the proposed Revolution Wind project. How can the public know if this project can actually comply with the SAMP if we don't even have access to their own economic development benefits? It also keeps the cultural resources avoidance, minimization, and mitigation measures confidential, as is the initial site assessment. The air emissions calculations and methodology are confidential. The marine archaeological resources assessment is confidential. The terrestrial archaeological resources assessment is confidential. The visual impact assessment on historical resources is confidential. But most importantly, even if you don't care about these, their emergency response plan is confidential. We as the public are not even allowed to access the emergency response plan. This is not consistent with either the letter or the spirit of the Ocean SAMP. And you all have the power to not permit a concurrence or to decide against concurrence. And I have about 20 more points I would like to make, but I will end on that one. Trust and transparency was one of the tenets of the Ocean SAMP. And unfortunately, the developers of this project have violated that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Stephen Knight, PH Knight. I'm Lisa's husband. Is there a restriction on husband and wife? Okay. I'll be very brief. I'm a physician, originally a scientist. I build biotech companies. I just make 2 points. One, Orsted the company is gonna make a lot of money off of this project. I mean, and I'm all, as a capitalist, I'm all for it. But, and I'm sure you guys know, I would just say there were a couple of observations I made when my wife was pointing this out, and I was originally skeptical. One is when people are hiding things, like 50% of the appendices, there's usually a reason why they're hiding things. And knowing about the funding for decommissioning, no one will tell you the amount because they don't want to tell you the amount or who's going to eventually have the liability for it. And so that's a big factor. The state of Rhode Island should be worried about that. The other point I'd like to make, and Mr. Ingles made a lot of wonderful, I did a wonderful presentation, and I don't doubt his earnestness or want to impugn him in any way. But each time there was a disagreement, it's either hiding behind the federal government. The federal government is not going to say, you have to do it in a way that is detrimental to the state of Rhode Island, or would say, we'll make best efforts. In my experience with companies, and I've started lots of biotech companies, it is very rare that when someone says, a corporate entity says, under our best intentions, that you actually will get that. They don't have the same incentives. It takes regulatory bodies. And I would just point out that, I mean, I share the young lady's concerns, and I definitely believe in climate change. Orsted's own statement says it will not have a measurable impact, but maybe that was Bohm, on climate change. I have not seen a great calculation. I know the top line for how much carbon is going to be saved, but none of that includes all the costs of what carbon is going to go into it. And I haven't seen a great calculation. This, to the best of my knowledge, is the largest scale industrialization of the ocean in human history off the coast of Rhode Island. And as far as I can determine, it has not been adequately studied. So I don't know the big panic and the big rush to do things. Maybe it is in the end the best thing to do, but it doesn't need to be rushed through. And I would get answers to the questions that are hidden before doing it. So that's.
Thank you.
Just have a brief statement to read. Bill Thompson, PHOMPSON. First, I'd like to acknowledge the vital role that the CRMC plays in safeguarding our coastal waters and commend the council for the exhaustive and thoughtful research that went into this consistency report. Regarding commercial and recreational fishing, it seems extremely likely that significant long-term adverse impacts will occur as a result of the surveying, construction, cable laying, operation, and eventual decommissioning of the Revolution wind turbine. Rhode Island's fishing industry is of vital importance to the state's economy, food supply, and identity. Using climate change and the questionable efficacy of offshore wind as a blanket justification for the degradation and potential destruction of our rich and unique fishing grounds, including Cox Lake, is short-sighted, reckless, and potentially catastrophic. Given the anticipated negative impacts, the lack of clarity regarding net benefits or losses to the marine economic sector, and the strong likelihood of a major disruption to cod, squid, scallop, and other fisheries, the CRMC should seriously reconsider their concurrence with this project. The approval thereof would represent a complete disregard for the Ocean SAMP's directive of safeguarding fisheries and improving sustainability. Revolution Winds offer to reduce the number of turbines and use micro-siding for the foundation installations would not significantly lessen the negative impacts, in my opinion. Fishermen view their profession as a way of life and not merely as a job. Being forced to seek a new occupation due to an unavoidable fishery collapse would represent a tragic chapter in the history of the ocean state.
Thank you.
My name is Timmons Roberts, Timmons, Roberts, Roberts. Thank you to the CRMC. I do not envy you your job. staying late at hearings. We appreciate it very much. And you guys have been through, and the staff, tremendous amount of work on this. I'm a professor at Brown University. I'm not speaking for Brown University. I've been working on climate change and clean energy issues in Rhode Island for 14 years. I've been studying climate change for 32 years. And I can explain really respectfully what the urgency is here, that carbon dioxide is accumulating in the atmosphere. Temperatures are rising. Just even looking at average temperatures at TF Green Airport, we have about 2 more weeks of basically summer conditions than we had when I was a kid. And I think you all have, people are perceiving it, it can't be denied. And this stuff stays up there for hundreds and hundreds of years once we put carbon dioxide up there. We need to stop. Nobody else is going to do it for us. Rhode Island can be a leader. What's more, we're spending $3 billion at least a year on fossil fuel energy that we're importing to the state. That's $3,000 per person. Everybody in this room is spending $3,000 that's going to Louisiana, Texas, Pennsylvania, and so on for the natural gas, especially. This can be turned into jobs and economic opportunities for the state. When I've worked with my students in trying to be part of the public policy process on climate change in Rhode Island, we helped in 2014 pass the Resilient Rhode Island Act, which passed targets for our emissions reductions of 80% by 2050. We knew at that time that they were out of date. The science was already out of date, but that was all that was possible. It took the Act on Climate Law to actually make them binding and bring them to a much more scientifically supported position on what we need to do. Essentially, we need to reduce our emissions by half by 2030, really, as a planet. And if we in the wealthy countries can't do it, then who is? I mean, anyway, we need China to act, yes, but we cannot wait for China to act. We need to act. And we have an awesome resource right here. I hired, with a little bit of funding I asked the president of Brown University if I could have $25,000 to rehire the same consultant that did the modeling for the 2016 greenhouse gas emissions reduction plan, knowing that the science was out of date. And we looked at how it could be done more quickly. So it's a study, he was from the Stockholm Environment Institute. They have an office in Boston at Tufts, right outside Tufts University. And we found that we could reduce the emissions in the state very quickly if we electrify transport and electrify our solar heat. And we can do that with offshore wind. That is, we're going to probably need double the amount of electricity that we're using now. And offshore wind was the one available and affordable resource that we have in Rhode Island. This is a mature industry. A lot of the problems that we're hearing about today have not caused the collapse of industries and of ecosystems in other parts of the world. In Europe, I looked online just now, there's 5,400 turbines as of February of 2021. They're installing 19 gigawatts of offshore energy per year. There's a reason. It's affordable. The technology is there. The problems have been addressed. We have a partner who's willing to put in the money from Ørsted. They have the experience from Europe. It's going to be their money. Yes, we should have better compensation and understanding of the impacts on the fishing community, and I appreciate that very much. But many of the concerns, I think, are really quite speculative and unsupported by the research of concerns of many types, especially on the biology. I have spent my life, I was originally a biology undergraduate, spent my life working with biologists in environmental studies programs in 3 universities. And these people give their lives to the things that they care about, the ecosystems and the species that they study. And those people, including the bulk of the National Wildlife Federation, the Audubon Society, the Woods Hole, and all the biology people that I know are in favor of offshore wind, that we need to do this because climate change is urgent, that our species of fish are changing very quickly in Rhode Island because of warming waters. There's an ocean heat wave going on. And therefore, we'll have to monitor what's going on. And we should be adaptive in terms of how we manage this problem. But we're not going to fall off a cliff here. I therefore, humbly, or maybe not so humbly, but I strongly urge your concurrence with conditions on the Revolution Wind project. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's fine, I don't mean the people to speak, but I think you have to continue. I just think you're gonna have to, because there's gonna have to be deliberation too.
Right. How many more people wish to speak? Yeah, 6, 7, anyone on this side? We're gonna do deliberation. I mean, rather than push it, then we're not gonna finish tonight. So rather than try and say 1, 2 more, we're not gonna finish. For the benefit of our stenographer, staff, everyone here. I think we will continue it. What are we looking at?
May 9th. That's your next meeting.
What unless we do, can we do a special meeting?
We got to pull the council for their availability.
Does May 9th give you enough time?
May 9th is a regularly scheduled meeting of the council for.
Yeah, but the question is then you're gonna have to rate things afterwards.
And we have May 12th is the decision deadline for consistency.
Correct.
Depending on the vote of the council. That should give us enough time to take the recommendation of staff, if this is what is actually voted upon by the council. And put it into a format to send down to Bohm. I'm looking at you, Kevin, because it depends on to your.
Having trouble hearing.
It should go on the record, yes.
Speak up. I'm sorry, because you guys like talking.
Okay.
Sorry.
Sorry, the question is whether or not the matter will be continued to the next regularly scheduled meeting on May 9th to continue the public hearing and have the council deliberate and vote. The question from the chair to Mr. Sloan, whether or not that would give him enough time to draft the necessary documents for the decision to go to Bohm by the May 12th deadline.
Before you answer that, let me just ask the council, if we came back, special meeting next Tuesday night, is everyone available?
What's the date?
May 2nd.
What's that?
May 2nd.
I'm probably available. I'll double check. We need 6, we have 7, is that correct? Yes.
We need 6, that's correct. We need the same members to show.
Nobody has to recuse himself.
No. Well, we would need these same 6 members to show. next Tuesday
And
night.
that's going to be strictly public input.
Public
I
input.
would continue public comment and
Can you do any other day than Tuesday?
I don't want to repeat anything we did tonight, basically.
I don't care. I mean, if Tuesday's,
And
we may not have our
you need to
attorneys.
advertise when, pretty quick, right? You do May 2nd, you need to advertise what is it? 48 hours.
Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is that doable for? No. Ms. Hall can't.
Get this done in another half hour.
Probably not.
No. Okay.
I don't think so. Here's the thing. When the public wants to speak, you don't want to limit the public what they have to say.
5 more people.
And then you don't want to rush through deliberations. So I think it's probably best if it's just continued on. Give the rest of the public a chance to say what they have to say. Give you all a chance what you have to say too.
Anybody want to do it this Thursday?
What's that?
I can do it this Thursday.
For me, this Thursday is in the 27th.
Mhm.
Yeah.
So.
They have to advertise it. They have issues with-
Under the open, just continue the public hearing. Just continue the public hearing
I'm sorry.
and make sure that it hits the well, today's Tuesday, can't do it on Thursday. You missed the 48 hours under the Open Meetings
That's
Act.
correct. That's correct.
Want to just make it easy and keep it the next scheduled meeting?
That's bad.
We're gonna have to. That's fine. Then we will look for May 9th as the continuation of this hearing.
Is everyone available May 9th? That's our next scheduled meeting.
And started at 5.
And we need all 6 members to
We
show.
don't need to,
Okay.
because that's the only thing that would be on the agenda that evening, right?
Well, let me throw this wrench in there. We do have applications that still need to be heard, but if we can make the meeting just dedicated to this matter, but if we want to have a couple applications after this hearing concludes, we have the room, we have it till 9 o'clock.
Oh, that's fine. But I only asked that because the question was made, should we start it early? But
I'm fine with that.
We can certainly contact the Department of Administration to see if we can start at 5 o'clock. If we cannot, we will start it at 6 o'clock, the normal time that we already have the meeting scheduled for.
Thank you, that's.
Yeah, we can certainly endeavor that.
and how will the public know?
We will advertise as soon as possible through our website, through our public notification listservs, mailings, postings.
Just, I have a question about a 5 o'clock start. Is that fair for the members of the public trying to get out of work to, I mean, does that limit accessibility?
That's a good point. We should ask. We should ask. But for those people that, you know, and I apologize if you hadn't stayed till 10 o'clock and the clock ran out, but would a 5 o'clock start for those who wish to testify on May 9th? Would that be inconvenient based on your work schedules?
Works for me.
That's okay for the public if we start at 5 o'clock? Okay.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. What we will do first thing in the morning is contact DOA and try to secure the room for 5 o'clock.
Okay.
Need a motion to continue the public hearing to May 9th at either.
All right. At this point, I would entertain a motion to continue the public hearing on this particular matter.
Yeah.
To May 9th. At either 5 or 6 o'clock. And upon, when we get that determination, time will be posted. I need a motion.
I'll make a motion.
Motion made, seconded. Any discussion? I'll pull the council. Ms. Izzy.
Aye.
Mr. Paul.
Aye.
Okay.
Aye.
Mr. Govern.
Aye.
Mr. Gomez. And two Raymond Coy vote aye. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion made and seconded to adjourn. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you to the public. Thank you to the Capitol Police for letting us stay a little bit more. And the staff and everyone.
So